The waiter who silenced a ballroom. The crowd laughed as champagne flowed and a scarred woman sat alone in the corner, invisible despite the glittering lights. They whispered cruel jokes, turned away from her pain, and celebrated their own importance, until a single father working as a waiter did what no wealthy guest dared to do. One bow, one outstretched hand. One dance that stopped the music and froze every conversation in the room. What happened next revealed a hidden military connection, shattered every assumption, and proved that courage doesn't wear expensive suits. Watch until the end to see how one act of kindness changed 4 lives forever. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Rosewood Grand Ballroom had been transformed into something out of a dream, or perhaps a carefully orchestrated fantasy designed to make people forget they were still standing on ordinary ground. Crystal chandeliers caught the light from 1,000 angles, scattering fragments of brilliance across walls draped in midnight blue silk. Round tables dressed in white linen surrounded a dance floor that gleamed like still water. And at the far end of the room, a 10-piece orchestra played something smooth and expensive, the kind of music that knew its own worth. This was the Halston Industries annual charity gala, an event that drew the city's elite like moths to a very exclusive, very expensive flame. Men in tailored tuxedos stood in clusters, discussing mergers and market trends between sips of 30-year-old scotch. Women in designer gowns drifted past like exotic birds, their jewelry catching the light with every measured gesture. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Everyone who mattered was here. Everyone who wanted to be seen, to be counted among the city's power players, had made certain their name appeared on the guest list. The air hummed with self-importance, with the particular energy that comes from gathering people who measure their value in bank accounts and social currency. But in the corner near the western windows, tucked behind a decorative column and partially obscured by shadow, sat someone who wished desperately to be anywhere else. Iris Halston occupied her chair the way a shipwreck survivor might cling to driftwood, present only because the alternative was drowning. She was 28 years old, though the careful way she held herself made her seem both older and younger at once. Her dress was beautiful, a deep emerald silk that should have made her striking, but she wore it like armor, her posture defensive, her shoulders curved inward as if protecting something fragile. The right side of her face was smooth and lovely, with high cheekbones and skin that still held the last traces of a summer tan. But the left side told a different story. Scar tissue ran from her temple down to her jaw in an irregular pattern, the aftermath of a car accident 5 years earlier. The scars had faded from angry red to a pale, permanent reminder that some things cannot be undone. Plastic surgeons had done what they could, but the damage went deeper than what scalpels could reach. Iris had long ago stopped covering the scars with makeup. That particular kind of camouflage only drew more attention, making people stare longer as they tried to figure out what they were seeing. Better to let them look quickly, let them process and dismiss, let them move on to more interesting sights. Better to become part of the background, something noted and forgotten. She lifted her champagne glass without drinking from it, a prop to give her hands something to do. Around her, the gala flowed and sparkled and laughed, a river of social currency that parted around her like water around stone. Did you see her? A woman's voice drifted over from the next table, pitched just loud enough to be heard over the music. Grant Halston's daughter, sitting there like some kind of tragic ghost. Tragic is right. Another voice, male this time, lazy with expensive alcohol. All that money and nothing to be done about, well, you know. I heard she doesn't even work at the company anymore, just stays home living off daddy's fortune. Iris's fingers tightened slightly on her glass. The voices weren't trying to be quiet. They never were. There was a particular cruelty in being discussed as if you weren't present, as if your proximity made no difference to the conversation. She'd learned years ago not to react. Confrontation only made things worse, turned whispers into open speculation, private mockery into public theater. Better to sit still, to keep her expression neutral, to wait for the evening to end so she could go home and finally breathe again. Across the ballroom, seated at the head table on a slightly raised platform, Grant Halston watched his daughter with the helpless frustration of a man who'd built an empire but couldn't solve the one problem that mattered. He was 62, silver-haired and distinguished, the kind of man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. CEOs and senators sought his counsel. His company employed 15,000 people across 3 continents. He could negotiate billion-dollar contracts and reshape market sectors with a single strategic decision. But he couldn't make people be kind to his daughter. "Grant, you're not listening." The woman beside him, Vivian Caldwell from the Hospital Foundation Board, touched his arm lightly. "I was saying the fundraising numbers are extraordinary this year." Grant pulled his attention back, forcing a smile. "Yes, extraordinary. Your team did excellent work." But his eyes kept drifting back to that corner, to the hunched shoulders and downcast gaze of the child he'd failed to protect. The accident hadn't been anyone's fault. Black ice, bad timing, a moment of physics and chance. But the aftermath, the way the world treated her now, that was humanity's doing. That was a choice people made every day, and it hollowed him out to witness it. He'd tried everything. Hired therapists, arranged social opportunities, even suggested cosmetic procedures that might reduce the scarring. Iris had refused it all, with quiet determination. "I'm tired of being fixed, Dad," she told him after the 3rd consultation. "I just want to be left alone." So he'd backed away, given her space, let her retreat into the guest house on his property, where she spent her days reading and painting and avoiding the world that had decided she was no longer worth looking at. And he hated himself for the relief he'd felt. For the part of him that was grateful she no longer forced him to confront his own powerlessness. Tonight was supposed to be different. He'd convinced her to attend by promising it would be brief, painless, just a few hours of presence and then she could leave. He'd seated her away from the main crowd, given her the corner she'd requested. He thought maybe, somehow, it would be enough. But watching her now, seeing the way she made herself small while voices carried their casual cruelty across the expensive air, Grant understood he'd only created another opportunity for her to be hurt. Near the kitchen entrance, Lucas Reed balanced a tray of empty champagne flutes and tried not to think about how his feet were already aching. 36 years old and working a catering gig at a fancy hotel wasn't exactly where he'd imagined his life heading, but circumstances had a way of rewriting expectations. He cut a striking figure despite the anonymous white jacket, tall and lean with broad shoulders that spoke of physical work and careful maintenance. His dark hair was showing the first threads of gray at the temples, and his face carried the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from time spent outdoors and experiences that left permanent marks. His hands, steady and competent as they managed the tray, bore old calluses and the faint traces of scars that told stories he rarely shared. "Table 7 needs refills," Marcus, the head waiter, said as he passed. "And keep moving. These people don't like to wait." Lucas nodded and made his way toward the bar, navigating around clusters of guests with the practiced invisibility of service industry veterans. He'd learned long ago that wealthy people often looked through workers as if they were part of the furniture, useful, necessary, but not quite human enough to acknowledge. It didn't bother him. He'd seen enough of the world to know that sight had more to do with attention than eyes, and most of these people spent their lives looking at the wrong things. The job was simple, the pay was decent, and it gave him the flexibility he needed for Mia. That was all that mattered. Everything else, his past, his training, the man he'd been before his wife died, belonged to a different life. This life, the one he'd built in the 3 years since Sarah's death, was smaller and quieter and entirely dedicated to making sure his 7-year-old daughter never doubted she was loved. "Hey, Reed." Janine, one of the bartenders, slid a fresh tray of champagne across the polished wood. "You see who's here tonight? Grant Halston himself. Word is his daughter's here too, somewhere in the back." Lucas lifted the tray, testing its weight. "Sad story, that one." Janine lowered her voice, leaning in with the conspiratorial tone of someone sharing gossip. "Beautiful girl, apparently. Then some accident a few years back, and now she's all scarred up. They say she never goes anywhere anymore." Lucas felt something tighten in his chest, a familiar ache he recognized from his own mirror. He knew what it was like to wear damage on the outside, to have strangers look at you and decide your story before you'd said a word. His scars were mostly hidden under clothes, but they were there, Roadmap of the night his convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar, the night that ended his military career and began his long journey back to something resembling normal. "Where is she?" he asked quietly. Janine gestured vaguely toward the western wall, back corner by herself. Poor thing. Lucas moved away from the bar, his trajectory shifting slightly as he scanned the ballroom. It took him a moment to spot her, partially hidden behind the column, and when he did, something in his chest cracked open. She was beautiful. That was his first thought, immediate and certain. The scars didn't diminish that. They simply were part of the landscape of her face, no more and no less than any other feature. But it was her posture that arrested him, the particular way she held herself that he recognized bone deep. That was the stance of someone trying to disappear, someone who'd learned that being small meant being safe. He'd sat exactly like that in the months after Sarah's funeral, in the VA support groups where other broken soldiers gathered to share their brokenness. He'd held himself together with the same careful control, afraid that any loosening would lead to complete collapse. Lucas knew that posture. He knew what it cost. As he watched, a couple at the nearby table laughed, and he saw Iris flinch, barely perceptible, just a slight tightening of her shoulders. She lifted her champagne glass to her lips without drinking, and Lucas recognized that too. The prop, the barrier, the small ritual that gave you something to do with your hands while the world carried on around you. "Excuse me, waiter." A woman snapped her fingers in his direction. "We need more champagne at table 12. Lucas pulled his gaze away, delivered the drinks, collected empty glasses, performed his function. But his attention kept returning to that corner, to the woman who sat alone in a room full of people, present and yet profoundly invisible. The orchestra shifted into something slower, a waltz that drew couples onto the dance floor. Grant Halston stood, offering his hand to Vivian Caldwell with practiced courtesy. Around the room, other pairs joined them, men in expensive tuxedos guiding women in gowns that cost more than most cars, everyone performing the elaborate dance of social status and carefully maintained appearances. Iris watched them with the detached interest of someone observing a foreign custom. She'd loved dancing once, before the accident. Her mother had enrolled her in ballet at age 5, and she'd continued through high school, spending hours at the bar perfecting her turnout and extension. There'd been something pure about it, the way movement could express things words couldn't reach. She hadn't danced in 5 years, hadn't felt the music move through her body, hadn't trusted anyone to look at her that closely, to hold her that near. Dancing required being seen, and being seen meant being judged. Better to stay still. Better to wait for the evening to end. Oh, look at them. The woman at the next table was back, her voice carrying that particular tone of false sympathy that was somehow worse than open mockery. All those beautiful couples. Must be hard for Grant's daughter watching, knowing she'll never... Carol. Her companion made a token effort at discretion. She can probably hear you. So? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. It's sad, that's all. Some things money can't fix. Iris set down her champagne glass very carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. She'd promised her father she'd stay until 9 o'clock. That was the deal. Just 2 more hours and then she could leave, could climb into the back of the town car and return to her small, safe world where no one looked at her with pity or disgust or uncomfortable fascination. 2 hours. She could survive 2 hours. But the music swelled and the couples spun across the gleaming floor, and Iris felt something inside her begin to crack. Not dramatically, not a clean break, just a slow, steady fracturing of the last bit of hope she'd been holding on to. The hope that someday, somehow, she might find a way back to the person she'd been before the accident. The person who'd believed the world was fundamentally kind, that people saw what mattered, that being herself was enough. That hope was dying. She could feel it leaving, breath by breath, and part of her welcomed its departure. Hope, after all, was just another word for expectation, and expectations only set you up for disappointment. Better to stop hoping. Better to accept what was and stop fighting for what might be. She was so lost in this thought, so consumed by the quiet grief of letting go, that she didn't notice the waiter approaching until he was standing directly beside her table. Lucas had made his decision somewhere between the bar and the buffet station, in that wordless place where instinct lived. He talked himself through every rational argument against it. This wasn't his business. It could cost him his job. She probably wanted to be left alone. He was just a waiter and she was Grant Halston's daughter. Their worlds didn't intersect. But none of that mattered as much as the simple, stubborn truth that he couldn't watch someone suffer and do nothing about it. He'd learned that lesson in the worst way possible, in the months after Sarah's diagnosis when he'd watched cancer systematically dismantle the woman he loved. She'd asked him once, near the end, what he wished he'd done differently. Everything, he'd said, holding her hand in the hospice room. I wish I'd done everything louder and sooner and bigger. Sarah had smiled, her voice already thin and distant. Then promise me something, Lucas. Promise me you'll never look at someone who's hurting and turn away. Promise me you'll be brave enough to be kind, even when it's awkward or inappropriate or doesn't make sense. He'd promised. And he'd spent the 3 years since her death trying to live up to that promise, trying to be the kind of man his daughter could be proud of, the kind of man who kept his word even to the dead. So Lucas set down his tray, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the corner where Iris Halston sat alone. She looked up when his shadow fell across her table, her expression wary and tired all at once. "Excuse me," Lucas said quietly, and even he could hear the slight rasp in his voice, the nervousness that came from doing something that might go terribly wrong. "I know this is probably inappropriate. I know I'm supposed to be working, and you're supposed to be a guest, and there are about a dozen rules I'm breaking right now." Iris stared at him, her eyes, one gray-green, the other marked by a slight cloudiness from the accident, widening slightly. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Lucas took a breath and kept going, the words tumbling forward before he could second-guess them. "But I've been watching you sit here all evening, and I've watched people walk past you like you're invisible, and I've listened to them say cruel things like, you can't hear them, and I just..." He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound patronizing or pitying. "I just think that's wrong. I think you deserve better than that." Iris's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I don't understand." Lucas extended his hand, palm up, an off-offering rather than a demand. "Would you dance with me?" The question hung in the air between them, impossible and immediate. Around them, the ballroom continued its elaborate performance, couples whirling across the floor, conversations flowing like expensive wine, music wrapping everything in a veneer of elegance. But in this small pocket of space, time seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. Iris looked at his outstretched hand as if he'd offered her a live grenade. Her first instinct was to refuse, to thank him politely and send him away, to protect them both from whatever disaster this would inevitably become. She could already imagine the whispers, the stares, the way this kind gesture would transform into tomorrow's gossip. But there was something in his eyes, a steadiness, a depth of understanding that suggested he knew exactly what he was asking and why it mattered. This wasn't pity. This wasn't charity or a dare or some elaborate joke. This was something else, something she'd almost forgotten existed. This was seeing. "I can't," Iris said, the words automatic, defensive. "I haven't danced in years. I don't remember how, and I'll help you," Lucas said simply. "And if you step on my feet, I promise I've survived worse." A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "You'll get fired." "Maybe." Lucas kept his hand extended, steady and patient. "But I've worked worse jobs, and I'll find another. This moment, though..." He paused, holding her gaze. "This moment only happens once, and I think you deserve to be asked. I think you deserve to say yes if you want to." Iris felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, hot and unexpected. When was the last time someone had offered her a choice instead of making assumptions? When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen possibility instead of limitation? She glanced toward the head table where her father stood with Vivian Caldwell, laughing at something Grant had said. He hadn't noticed her yet, hadn't seen the waiter standing beside his daughter's table. In a moment he would, and then he'd intervene, or the hotel manager would, or someone else would put a stop to this before it could begin. But right now, in this breath, the choice was hers. Iris looked back at Lucas, at his scarred hands and patient eyes, at the way he held himself with quiet dignity despite the anonymous uniform and the job that made him invisible. She thought about Sarah, The wife he'd mentioned, the promise he was keeping. She thought about 5 years of hiding, of making herself small, of accepting the world's verdict that she was too broken to be wanted, and she thought, not tonight. Tonight, just for one dance, I want to be someone who says yes. Iris placed her hand in his. Okay. Lucas's fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Iris didn't flinch from being touched. He helped her stand, and she was surprised to find her legs supported her weight, that her body remembered how to move even when her mind insisted she couldn't. They walked toward the dance floor, and it was like crossing an ocean. Every eye seemed to track their movement, conversation stuttering to a halt as people registered what they were seeing. Grant Halston's scarred daughter being led onto the floor by a waiter in a cheap jacket. Lucas felt the weight of their attention, but didn't acknowledge it. His focus remained on Iris, on the small hand trembling in his, on the courage it was taking for her to keep walking when every instinct probably screamed at her to run. "You're doing great," he murmured as they reached the edge of the dance floor. The orchestra was playing a slow waltz, the kind of music that forgave imperfect steps and allowed for human error. "I'm terrified," Iris admitted, her voice barely audible over the music. "Good." Lucas turned to face her, gently placing his right hand on her waist while maintaining his hold on her left hand. "Fear means you're doing something that matters, means you're brave enough to risk it." He began to move, leading her into the basic box step of the waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Simple and steady, giving her time to remember, to trust, to breathe. Iris stumbled slightly on the first turn, her body stiff with anxiety. But Lucas adjusted immediately, his lead firm enough to guide but gentle enough to allow. "I've got you," he said quietly. "Just follow my movement. Let the music do the work." She tried to relax, to let her muscles remember what her mind had tried to forget. The steps came back slowly, muscle memory reasserting itself despite years of disuse. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, cheer. Her feet found the rhythm, and suddenly they were dancing, truly dancing, moving together across the gleaming floor. Lucas was a better dancer than she'd expected, not flashy or showy, but competent and assured. He guided her through the turns with the quiet confidence of someone who'd done this before, who understood how to lead without controlling, how to support without overwhelming. "Where did you learn to dance?" Iris asked, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. "My wife," Lucas said, and there was a softness in his tone that suggested both love and loss. "Sarah. She insisted that any man worth marrying should know how to waltz. Spent weeks teaching me in our living room, stepping on each other's feet and laughing like idiots." "She sounds wonderful." She was. Lucas guided Iris through a gentle spin, and she felt something inside her chest crack open, not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked too long. "She died 3 years ago, cancer. But she made me promise I'd keep dancing, keep being brave enough to be kind even when it scared me." Iris looked up at him, really looked, and saw the scars he carried that weren't written on his skin. The grief in his eyes, the particular loneliness that came from loving someone and losing them, the weight of trying to be enough for whoever was left behind. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For your loss." "I'm sorry too," Lucas replied. "For whatever happened to you. For the way people have treated you. For every time someone made you feel like you were less than you are." The tears that had been threatening spilled over, tracking down both sides of her face, the scarred and the smooth equally wet. But Iris didn't look away, didn't try to hide. For the first time in 5 years, she let someone see her cry and didn't feel ashamed. They continued to dance, moving through the music while around them the ballroom gradually fell silent. Couples slowed, then stopped, standing still on the dance floor as they watched this impossible scene. The CEO's damaged daughter and the waiter, moving together with a grace that had nothing to do with technique and everything to do with shared understanding. Grant Halston stood frozen at the edge of the floor, Vivian's hand falling away from his arm. He watched his daughter, his Iris, his broken, beautiful girl, smile. Actually smile, her whole face transforming with an expression he thought he'd never see again. Joy. Real, unguarded joy. "Grant," Vivian whispered, "who is that man?" "I don't know," Grant said hoarsely, I'm going to find out. The music swelled toward its crescendo, and Lucas lifted Iris's hand above her head, guiding her into a final spin. She moved with him, trusting, and when the spin completed, she was laughing, a sound so unexpected and pure that several people in the crowd gasped. The orchestra held the final note, letting it ring through the silent ballroom, and then the music stopped. Lucas and Iris stood in the center of the dance floor, his hand still on her waist, her hand still in his. They were both breathing hard, both smiling, both aware that something profound had just occurred and unsure what to do with it. "Thank you," Iris said, and her voice was steady now, clear and certain. "Thank you for seeing me." Before Lucas could respond, the ballroom doors burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. A small figure in a pink dress came running across the polished floor, pigtails flying, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. She was 7 years old, all skinny limbs and endless energy, and she was calling out at the top of her lungs, "Daddy! Daddy! I drew you a picture!" Lucas's eyes widened in alarm as his daughter, who was supposed to be at home with the babysitter, barreled toward him with the single-minded determination of a heat-seeking missile. "Mia? What are you... How did you..." Mia skidded to a stop beside them, panting and grinning, waving her drawing like a victory flag. "Mrs. Chen brought me. She said you were working at the fancy party, and I wanted to give you this." She thrust the paper at Lucas, and he took it automatically, his mind still trying to catch up with this development. The drawing showed 2 stick figures on what was clearly meant to be a dance floor, surrounded by hearts and stars. Above them, in Mia's careful printing, were the words, "Daddy dancing with a princess." Iris stared at the drawing, then at Mia, then back at the drawing. Something in her chest expanded, warm and unexpected. "Princess?" she said softly. Mia looked up at her, completely unaware of scars or social hierarchies or any of the complicated adult things that made the world difficult. She saw a pretty lady in a green dress who'd been dancing with her daddy, and that was enough. "You're really pretty," Mia announced with the brutal honesty of children. "And your dress is my favorite color. Are you a real princess? Do you live in a castle?" Lucas made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. "Mia, you can't just..." But Iris was kneeling down, bringing herself to Mia's level, and her face had transformed into something radiant. "Not a real princess," she said gently, "but I like that your daddy dances like a prince. Where did he learn to be so brave?" "From my mommy," Mia said matter-of-factly. "She's in heaven now, but she taught Daddy that being brave means being nice to people, especially when other people aren't looking." The words landed in the silence like stones in still water, rippling outward. Around the ballroom, people shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how they'd spent their evening, gossiping and judging and ignoring a woman who'd been sitting alone while they celebrated their own importance. Grant Halston pushed through the crowd, moving toward his daughter with his heart in his throat. He'd watched the dance, watched her transformation, and now he was watching her kneel beside a child in a pink dress, smiling like she used to before the world taught her to hide. "Iris!" he called out, his voice rough with emotion. She looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. In that moment, Grant saw what he'd been missing. Not that his daughter was broken, but that she'd been waiting for someone brave enough to see her, to choose her, to remind her that she was worthy of being chosen. And this waiter, this stranger with scarred hands and a dead wife and a daughter who understood kindness better than most adults, he'd done what Grant's money and power and connections never could. He'd given Iris back to herself. "Dad," Iris said, standing up and keeping one hand on Mia's shoulder. "This is Lucas. He asked me to dance." Grant extended his hand to Lucas, and there was a gravity to the gesture that transcended social hierarchy. This wasn't a CEO greeting an employee. This was a father thanking the man who'd saved his daughter's life in the most unexpected way possible. "Thank you," Grant said simply, and those 2 words carried the weight of 5 years of helpless watching, of prayers unspoken, of love that hadn't known how to help. Lucas shook his hand, then glanced around at the crowd that had gathered, at the orchestra standing frozen with their instruments, at the hotel manager hovering near the edge of the floor with a panicked expression. "I should probably go," Lucas said quietly. "I've caused enough disruption for one evening." "No." The word came from Iris, sharp and definitive. She turned to face the crowd, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't lower her gaze or try to make herself invisible. Everyone's already looking, everyone's already talking, so let's give them something worth saying. She took Lucas's hand again, and this time there was no hesitation in the gesture. One more dance, please, I want them to see. Lucas looked at her, really looked, the way he'd been looking all evening, and saw not damage or limitation, but fierce, defiant courage. Iris Halston had spent 5 years being invisible, and she was done. Done hiding, done apologizing for existing, done letting other people's comfort matter more than her own dignity. One more dance, Lucas agreed, and the orchestra, responding to some unspoken cue, began to play again. This time, when they moved across the floor, Iris held her head high. She met the eyes of everyone watching, daring them to look away, challenging them to find something wrong with this moment. Lucas guided her through the steps with the same steady confidence, but now there was joy in it, pure, uncomplicated joy that came from doing something that mattered. Mia bounced on the sidelines, clapping her hands and spinning in circles, her pink dress flaring out around her. Grant stood beside her, watching his daughter with tears streaming openly down his face. And around them, gradually, something in the crowd began to shift. People started to smile. Not the mocking smiles or pitying grimaces that Iris had learned to recognize, but real smiles, the kind that come from witnessing something genuine and true. Couples rejoined the dance floor, moving around Lucas and Iris, creating a circle of movement that felt like protection rather than imprisonment. Carol, the woman who'd been making cruel comments earlier, stood near the back of the crowd, with her hand over her mouth, her face flushed with shame. Beside her, her husband shook his head slowly, disappointment clear in his expression. Around the room, similar reactions rippled through the guests as they confronted the ugliness of their own behavior, the casual cruelty they'd displayed without thought or consequence. The music built toward its conclusion, and Lucas guided Iris into one final spin. She moved with him, trusting completely, and when she came back to face him, she was laughing again, that same pure sound that had stopped the room before. The final note rang out, and they held still in the center of the floor, surrounded by light and music, and the weight of a moment that would be remembered long after the evening ended. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, tentatively, and then building. A wave of applause that rolled through the ballroom until everyone was clapping, standing, and clapping, celebrating something they couldn't quite name but recognized as important. Iris turned in a slow circle, taking in the room, the faces, the genuine appreciation in their expressions. These were the same people who'd whispered and mocked and turned away less than an hour ago. And now they were standing for her, applauding her, seeing her. But she understood it wasn't really about her. It was about what Lucas had done, the risk he'd taken, the kindness he'd shown without expecting anything in return. He'd reminded them of something they'd forgotten in the pursuit of status and wealth and social position, that the most valuable currency was courage, and the most important choice was how you treated people when no one was forcing you to treat them well. Lucas stepped back, releasing Iris's hand, and bowed slightly, the gesture of a dance partner completing his duty. But Iris caught his hand again, holding on. "Don't go yet," she said softly, for his ears alone. "Please, I'm not ready for this to be over." Before Lucas could respond, Grant was there, with Mia bouncing beside him and his hand extended in welcome. "Mr. Reed, if that's your name, would you join us at our table? I'd very much like to know more about the man who did what I couldn't." Lucas hesitated, aware of his white service jacket and the tray he'd abandoned somewhere near the kitchen. He was supposed to be working, supposed to be invisible. This wasn't his world, and stepping further into it felt dangerous. But Mia tugged on his hand, looking up at him with those wide brown eyes that were so much like her mother's. "Can we stay, Daddy? Please? The pretty princess wants us to stay." And Iris was looking at him with hope and vulnerability and something that might have been the beginning of trust, and Lucas understood that turning away now would undo everything the dance had created. "All right," he said quietly. "Just for a little while." As they moved toward the head table, the crowd parting before them, Lucas caught sight of the hotel manager's expression, somewhere between horror and confusion. There would be consequences for this, probably. Questions about protocol and appropriate behavior and the vast gulf that was supposed to exist between servers and guests. But right now, walking across the polished floor with his daughter's hand in his and a scarred woman smiling beside him, Lucas couldn't bring himself to care. He'd made a promise to his dying wife, and he'd kept it. He'd been brave enough to be kind when it scared him, and something beautiful had come from that bravery. Whatever happened next, it had been worth it. The ballroom slowly resumed its former rhythm, music playing, conversations flowing, the gala moving forward. But something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere, a recalibration of what mattered and what didn't, what was worth celebrating and what was worth challenging. And in the corner that had seemed so dark and isolated just an hour before, 4 people gathered around a table. A grieving widower and his honest daughter, a scarred woman learning to hope again, and a father who'd finally witnessed a miracle. The night was far from over, but already it had become something none of them would ever forget. Already, it had proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is extend your hand to someone sitting alone in the corner. And sometimes the most radical act is simply choosing to see. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting their fragmented light across the scene. And in that illumination, scars and grief and loss looked different. Not erased, but transformed. Not hidden, but honored as part of the story. Not something to overcome, but something to carry with grace and dignity. Iris caught her father's eye across the table and smiled, really smiled, with her whole face and her whole heart. And Grant smiled back, understanding that his daughter hadn't been rescued tonight. She'd been remembered, reminded of what she'd always been beneath the scars and the fear and the years of hiding. She'd been reminded that she was worth seeing, worth choosing, worth dancing with in a room full of people who'd forgotten how to look. And that reminder, more than any amount of money, or social status, or careful protection, was the thing that would carry her forward into whatever came next. The music played on, and the night continued, and somewhere in the midst of it all, healing began. Two. The head table had never felt quite like this before. Grant had hosted hundreds of corporate functions over the years, sat through countless dinners with board members and investors and politicians, mastered the art of polite conversation that said much while revealing little. But tonight, with Lucas Reed sitting to his left and Iris glowing on his right while Mia chattered happily between bites of chocolate cake, everything felt different, real in a way that boardrooms and quarterly reports never managed to be. "So you're really a waiter?" Mia asked Lucas, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "That's your actual job?" Lucas smiled, the expression softening the weathered planes of his face. "One of them. I also do maintenance work at an apartment complex downtown, and sometimes I pick up shifts at the hardware store on weekends." "That's a lot of jobs," Mia observed with the serious consideration children brought to adult problems. "Don't you get tired?" "Sometimes," Lucas admitted, "but it means I can be there when you get home from school, and that's what matters most." Grant watched this exchange with fascination. In his world, people defined themselves by titles and positions: CEO, CFO, Director of Operations. They wore their careers like armor, using professional achievements to establish worth and hierarchy. But Lucas spoke about his work with no defensiveness or apology, presenting the facts without embellishment or shame. He worked multiple jobs to support his daughter, and that was enough. That was everything. "What did you do before?" Grant asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "Before the waiter and maintenance work?" Something flickered across Lucas's expression. Not quite pain, but the shadow of it, the memory of pain. "I was in the army, 12 years. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Made it to staff sergeant before..." He trailed off, his hand unconsciously moving to his left side where Grant could now see the edge of a scar disappearing beneath his collar. "Before I decided it was time to come home." The words were carefully chosen, Grant noted. Not before I got injured or before I was discharged, but before I decided. Giving himself agency in a story that probably included trauma and loss, and the kind of experiences that left permanent marks. Iris leaned forward, her eyes intent on Lucas's face. "Is that where you learned to be brave? In the army?" Lucas considered the question seriously, his gaze distant. "I learned a lot of things in the army. How to follow orders, how to stay calm under pressure, how to trust the person next to you with your life. But brave?" He shook his head slowly. "The army taught me about courage in combat, about pushing through fear when the mission demanded it, but being brave in the ways that matter, being kind when it's inconvenient, standing up when it's easier to sit down, choosing to see people when everyone else looks away. That's different. That's harder. Sarah taught you that? Mia said matter-of-factly, reaching for her milk. Mommy taught Daddy about the important kind of brave. Lucas's throat worked, emotion flickering across his features before he controlled it. Yeah, sweetheart. Mommy taught me the important stuff. Grant felt something crack in his chest, a fissure opening in the careful walls he'd built around his own grief. He'd lost his wife too, 15 years ago, to an aneurysm that struck without warning or mercy. He'd thrown himself into work afterward, built his company into an empire, used success as a bulwark against the emptiness. But he'd never learned what Lucas seemed to understand instinctively, that grief didn't have to harden you, that loss could teach tenderness instead of cynicism. I'm sorry about your wife, Grant said quietly. Losing a partner, there's no preparation for that kind of pain. Lucas met his eyes, and in that look passed an understanding that needed no elaboration. They were members of the same unwanted club, men who'd loved and lost and learned to carry on because there was no other choice. Thank you. And I'm sorry for whatever you lost too. I can see it in how you look at your daughter, that fear of losing someone else you love. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Grant glanced at Iris, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I nearly lost her, he said, the words emerging before he could stop them. 5 years ago. The accident. It was black ice on the highway, another driver who lost control. Iris's car flipped 3 times. When I got to the hospital, they said, he had to pause, swallow against the memory. They said it was a miracle she survived. But after that, after I understood how close I'd come to losing my only child, I didn't know how to let her live without wrapping her in bubble wrap and locking all the doors, Lucas finished gently. I know that feeling. After Sarah died, I was terrified something would happen to Mia. Wouldn't let her ride her bike without full body armor, practically. Made her hold my hand crossing empty parking lots. It took me a year to realize I wasn't protecting her. I was teaching her that the world was something to fear instead of something to engage with. How did you stop? Grant asked, and he was aware that he was leaning forward now, desperate for the answer. How did you learn to let go? Lucas smiled slightly, glancing at Mia, who was now arranging her remaining cake into what appeared to be a small fortress. I didn't, not completely, but I started trusting her more than I trusted my fear. Started asking myself if my choices were making her safer or just making me feel better. And slowly, bit by bit, I learned to step back and let her be brave without me. Iris made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sob. Dad, are you listening to this? Because he's basically describing exactly what I've been trying to tell you for 3 years. Grant turned to his daughter, seeing the tears gathering in her eyes and the tremor in her hands. Iris, I know you love me, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know the accident terrified you, and I know you've spent every day since trying to protect me from anything that might hurt me again. But Dad, your protection became a prison. You couldn't make people be kind to me, so you tried to keep me away from people altogether. You couldn't fix my scars, so you pretended they didn't matter, while simultaneously treating me like I was too fragile to exist in the real world. That's not... Grant started, but Iris held up her hand. Let me finish. Please. She took a shaky breath and Lucas reached over to squeeze her shoulder, a gesture of support that she accepted without flinching. I let you do it because I was scared too, because it was easier to hide than to face the pity and the stares and the constant reminder that I'd changed in ways I couldn't undo. But tonight, when Lucas asked me to dance, I realized something. She paused, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. The emerald dress caught the light, making her look both vulnerable and fierce. I realized that I've been letting fear make all my decisions. Fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of trying and failing. And that fear has cost me 5 years of my life. 5 years of hiding in your guest house, painting pictures no one ever sees, reading books to fill time I'm too afraid to actually live in. Grant felt each word like a physical blow, the truth of them landing in places he'd been carefully avoiding. I didn't know how to help you, he said hoarsely. I built a fortune, commanded thousands of employees, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but I couldn't make people see you the way I do. Couldn't make them understand that the scars are just scars, that you're still the same brilliant, beautiful daughter you always were, and that helplessness, God, Iris, it was killing me. I know, Dad. Iris's voice softened, and she reached across the table to take his hand. I know, but you can't protect me from the world. You can only teach me how to face it, and for 5 years, we've both been so busy protecting each other that we forgot how to actually live. The orchestra began another waltz, the music drifting across the ballroom like a question waiting to be answered. Couples moved onto the dance floor, fewer than before, Grant noticed, as if the evening's earlier drama had exhausted the crowd's appetite for performance. Dance with me, Iris said suddenly, squeezing her father's hand. Right now, I want everyone to see that I'm your daughter and you're not ashamed of me. Ashamed? Grant's voice cracked on the word. Iris, I have never been ashamed of you, not for 1 second. Then prove it, she challenged, and there was steel beneath the vulnerability now. Dance with your scarred daughter in front of all these people who've spent the evening whispering about how sad it is that Grant Halston's girl turned out so damaged. Grant stood so quickly, his chair scraped against the floor, the sound harsh and immediate. He came around the table and offered his hand with all the formality of a royal invitation. It would be my honor, Miss Halston. Iris took his hand and rose, and Grant was struck by how tall she'd grown, how much of her mother he could see in the set of her jaw and the determination in her eyes. They walked onto the dance floor together, father and daughter, CEO and artist, two people learning to see each other clearly for the first time in years. Lucas watched them go with a mixture of relief and something deeper, a recognition that he'd stumbled into the middle of a family's healing and somehow catalyzed something that had been waiting to happen. Beside him, Mia had abandoned her cake fortress and was leaning against his arm, her eyes already growing heavy. Daddy, she murmured sleepily, did we do a good thing tonight? Lucas wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Yeah, baby, I think we did. Mommy would be happy. Yeah, Lucas said again, his voice thick. She would be. On the dance floor, Grant guided Iris through the basic steps of the waltz, his movements careful and measured. He was a competent dancer. Ballroom lessons had been part of his business education, another tool in the arsenal of executive performance. But dancing with his daughter was different from dancing with board members' wives or potential investors. This mattered in ways that business never had. I'm sorry, he said as they turned, his voice low enough that only she could hear. For making you feel like you needed to hide. For treating your healing like a project I could manage instead of a journey you needed to walk. For being so afraid of losing you that I forgot to let you live. Iris's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling through them. I'm sorry too. For shutting you out, for letting fear run my life. For blaming you when I was just as responsible for the walls between us. They moved in silence for a moment, finding their rhythm, remembering how to exist together without the weight of unspoken worry and unexpressed grief pressing down between them. Around them, Grant became aware of people watching, not with the mocking cruelty from earlier, but with something gentler. Respect, maybe. A recognition of something genuine happening in real time. Tell me about your painting, Grant said as they completed a turn. You said you've been painting pictures no one sees. What do you paint? Iris hesitated, old habits of secrecy warring with this new impulse toward honesty. Landscapes mostly. Places I remember from before the accident, the beach house in Maine, the park where Mom used to take me for picnics, the view from our old apartment in the city. I paint memories, I think, trying to preserve the feeling of being somewhere without fear. I'd like to see them, Grant said, if you'd be willing to show me. Really? Iris searched his face for signs of polite interest or paternal duty, but found only genuine curiosity. You're not just saying that? Really, I want to know who you've become in the years while I was so busy trying to keep you safe. Want to understand what matters to you now, what makes you happy, what you dream about when you let yourself dream. The music swelled and Grant lifted their joined hands, guiding Iris into a spin. She moved with more confidence now, muscle memory and courage combining into something graceful. When the spin completed, she was laughing, that same pure sound that had transformed the room earlier. I dream about a studio, she admitted. A real one, with northern light and high ceilings and enough space to work on large canvases. I dream about showing my work, maybe. Not to prove anything to anyone else, but to prove to myself that I can create something worth sharing, that I'm more than my scars and my fear. Grant felt his throat tighten with emotion and pride and regret for all the time they'd wasted. Then let's make it happen. There's that old carriage house on the property. We could convert it. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. And when you're ready to show your work, I know a dozen gallery owners who owe me favors. Dad? Iris started to protest, old independence asserting itself. Not because you're my daughter, Grant interrupted gently, not as charity or pity, but because if you're half as talented as your mother was, then the world deserves to see what you create, and you deserve the chance to share it. The music shifted into its final movements, the waltz winding toward conclusion. Grant pulled Iris closer, dancing the way he used to when she was little and would stand on his feet, back when the world was simpler and his biggest worry was making sure she got to bed on time. Thank you, Iris whispered, for tonight, for listening, for dancing with me like you're proud instead of ashamed. Always proud, Grant said firmly. Every day, every moment, you're the best thing I ever helped create, and no accident or scar or amount of time will ever change that. The final note rang out and they stopped, standing together in the center of the floor with the chandeliers casting patterns of light across their joined hands. Applause rippled through the crowd again, but it felt different now, more respectful, less performative. People were witnessing something private being shared publicly, and they understood the privilege of that witnessing. Grant escorted Iris back to the table where Lucas had Mia practically asleep against his shoulder. The little girl's eyes opened briefly as they approached, and she gave Iris a sleepy smile. You looked really pretty dancing with your daddy, Mia murmured, like a real princess. Thank you, sweetheart, Iris said softly, reaching out to gently touch Mia's hair. The gesture was tentative but genuine, the beginning of connection. Lucas shifted Mia's weight, preparing to stand. I should probably get her home. It's way past bedtime, and she's going to be impossible to wake up tomorrow morning. Wait, Grant said quickly. Before you go, I need to know something. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You said you served in the army. Did you ever serve with anyone named David Halston? The question fell into the space between them like a stone into still water, and Lucas's expression transformed, shock and recognition, and something that looked like old grief. David Halston, he repeated slowly. Tall guy, always laughing, could fix anything with duct tape and determination. Grant's breath caught. That's him. That was my brother. Lucas set Mia carefully in her chair, his movements suddenly gentle and deliberate, as if he needed the action to ground himself. David was in my unit, he said quietly. We served together for 3 years. He was... Lucas paused, emotion roughening his voice. He was one of the best men I ever knew. When I got hit by the IED that ended my career, David was the one who pulled me out of the burning vehicle, saved my life while taking fire, got me to the medic, stayed with me until the helicopter came. Grant closed his eyes, his body swaying slightly. Iris reached out to steady him, her hand on his arm. What happened to him? Grant asked, though part of him already knew. The Army had sent official notifications, clinical language about heroic service and ultimate sacrifice, but they'd never provided the details he desperately needed. 3 months after I was evacuated, Lucas said, and his voice had gone flat, the tone of someone reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. His convoy got hit. He was pulling wounded soldiers out of a damaged vehicle when a second explosion... He stopped, unable to continue. He died doing what he always did, Grant finished, the words he'd told himself 100 times. Helping people. Being brave. He talked about you, Lucas said suddenly. In the barracks at night, when we'd share stories about home, he'd tell us about his older brother who built a company from nothing, who was brilliant and driven and scary smart. David was so proud of you, but he was also worried. Worried? Grant's eyes opened. About what? Lucas met his gaze steadily. He said you worked too hard, cared too much about success, and not enough about living. He used to say that when he got back stateside, he was going to drag you away from your office and make you remember what mattered. Family, connection, The things you can't measure in quarterly reports. The words hit Grant like a physical blow, stealing his breath. David had died 12 years ago, before Iris's accident, before everything fell apart. But his concerns had been prophetic. Grant had thrown himself even deeper into work after his brother's death, using business as an escape from grief, measuring his worth in deals closed and revenue generated. "I wish I'd listened to him," Grant said hoarsely. "I wish I'd had the chance to tell him he was right." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, the leather worn and creased from years of use. He opened it carefully and extracted a small piece of metal. A military coin, Grant realized, worn smooth from handling. "David gave me this the day before my evacuation," Lucas said, holding it out. It was his lucky coin, something his grandfather carried in World War II. He said it had kept him safe through 2 tours, and now it needed to keep me safe too. Grant took the coin with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of history and sacrifice in the small piece of metal. One side bore the insignia of David's unit, the other a simple inscription: "Courage is choosing kindness when fear says run." "That was David," Grant said, his voice breaking. "Always choosing kindness." "He made me promise something," Lucas continued, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "He said if anything happened to him, I should find you, give you that coin, and tell you something important." He paused, making sure Grant was listening. "He said to tell you that success means nothing if you're successful alone. That the only wealth that matters is the people who love you and the moments you spend with them. He said you needed to hear it from someone who understood both worlds, the one where achievement matters and the one where it doesn't." Iris was crying openly now, her hand still on her father's arm. She'd never met her Uncle David. He died before she was born. But she'd heard the stories, seen the photographs, understood that his loss had changed her father in fundamental ways. Grant stared at the coin in his palm, seeing not just metal, but a message sent across years and death and circumstance. His brother had known, even then, that Grant needed someone to shake him loose from his fixation on success. And here, 12 years later, in the most unexpected way possible, that message had finally arrived through a waiter who'd asked his daughter to dance. "Keep it," Lucas said softly. "David wanted you to have it. Wanted you to remember that the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be vulnerable. Let yourself need people. Let yourself love without worrying about the bottom line." Grant closed his fist around the coin, feeling its edges press into his palm. "How did you end up here?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at the ballroom. "Working as a waiter, of all things. After everything you did, everything you sacrificed, after everything I survived," Lucas corrected gently. "I came home with scars and nightmares and a determination to be present for my daughter. The Army offered me a medical retirement and I could have pushed for disability benefits that would have paid more. But I wanted to work, wanted to feel useful, wanted jobs that gave me flexibility to be the parent Mia needed." He shrugged, the gesture self-deprecating. "Turns out catering gigs are perfect for that. I work when I want, take time off when I need to, and nobody asks questions about my past." "But you could do so much more," Grant protested. "With your experience, your skills, I could make calls, open doors." "Mr. Halston," Lucas interrupted, and his voice was kind but firm. "I appreciate the offer, truly, but I don't need doors opened. I need to be home when Mia gets off the school bus. I need to help with her homework and make her dinner and tuck her in at night while remembering that my wife isn't there to do it with me. I need a life that's small enough to manage and flexible enough to adjust when grief catches up with me." He smiled slightly. "Success looks different when you've lost everything that mattered. Sometimes it looks like being able to pay rent and make pancakes on Saturday morning and not falling apart when your daughter asks why other kids have mommies and she doesn't." The honesty in his words silenced Grant's protests. He'd spent decades measuring success in dollars and deals, in power and position, in the tangible markers of achievement that proved his worth to the world. But Lucas was describing something different. A success measured in presence and patience, in showing up and staying steady, in being enough even when you felt like you were barely surviving. "I think David would have liked you," Grant said finally. "Would have appreciated your priorities." "I think he would have liked who you're becoming," Lucas replied, glancing at Iris. "Someone willing to listen, willing to change, willing to dance with his daughter in front of a room full of people who forgot how to see her. Mia stirred against Lucas's side, mumbling something about princesses and cake. He scooped her up gently, settling her against his shoulder with the practiced ease of single parenthood. "We really do need to go," he said apologetically. "But thank you. For not having me thrown out, for listening, for treating me like a person instead of just the help." "Thank you," Grant countered, "for giving me back my daughter, for showing both of us that courage and kindness matter more than all the money and power in the world." Iris stood as well, and before Lucas could move away, she reached out and hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that surprised them both. "Thank you for asking me to dance," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." "You were always worth seeing," Lucas said simply. "I just helped you remember that." He turned to leave, carrying his sleeping daughter toward the exit, and Grant watched them go with a strange mixture of gratitude and loss. This stranger, this waiter who'd stumbled into their lives for a single evening, had fundamentally altered the trajectory of his relationship with his daughter, had delivered a message from beyond the grave and reminded him what his brother had tried to teach him years ago, that the only wealth that mattered was love. "Dad," Iris said softly, and Grant turned to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Grant said slowly, "that I've been measuring the wrong things for a very long time. And I'm thinking that I almost lost you, not in the accident, but in all the years after when I was so busy trying to protect you that I forgot to actually be with you." Iris's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling. "So what do we do now?" Grant looked around the ballroom at the glittering chandeliers and expensive decorations, at the guests in their designer clothes and practiced smiles, at all the trappings of success that suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless. Then he looked back at his daughter, scarred and brave and learning to hope again, and he knew exactly what needed to happen. "Now," he said firmly, "we leave. This party can continue without us. I'm taking you to breakfast." Iris blinked in surprise. "Breakfast? Dad, it's 9:30 at night." "Then we'll find an all-night diner," Grant said, already pulling out his phone to text his driver. "The kind of place with checkered floors and bottomless coffee and absolutely no pretense. And we're going to sit in a booth and talk, really talk, about everything we've been avoiding for 5 years, about your painting and your dreams and what you want your life to look like, about how I can support you without suffocating you, how I can be your father without being your warden." "You're serious?" Iris said wonderingly. "You're actually serious? What about your guests? What about Vivian Caldwell and the hospital board and all the people who need FaceTime with Grant Halston?" "They'll survive without me for one night," Grant said, and he meant it. "For 5 years, I've put appearances and obligations ahead of what actually matters. I'm done with that. Starting now, you're my priority. Not the company, not the social obligations, not the next deal. You." Iris threw her arms around her father, sobbing into his shoulder. Grant held her tightly, feeling 5 years of distance and pain beginning to dissolve between them. They stood like that in the middle of the ballroom, father and daughter, letting people see their vulnerability and not caring what conclusions they drew. When they finally pulled apart, Iris was laughing through her tears. "A diner," she said. "I can't remember the last time I ate at a diner." "Then it's long overdue," Grant said. He offered his arm formally, the same way he'd offered his hand for the dance. "Shall we?" "We shall," Iris agreed, taking his arm. They walked toward the exit together, past guests who watched with varying expressions of confusion and curiosity. At the doorway, Grant paused and turned back to survey the room one final time. The gala would continue without him, the orchestra playing, the champagne flowing, the elaborate performance of wealth and status carrying on as if his presence or absence made no difference. And maybe that was the point. Maybe David had been trying to tell him all along that he was replaceable in the boardroom, but irreplaceable in his daughter's life. That success meant nothing if the people you loved felt abandoned by your pursuit of it. Grant pulled out his phone and fired off a quick text to his assistant. "Take tomorrow off. In fact, take the week. I'm spending time with my daughter, and I don't want to be disturbed unless the building is literally on fire." Then he pocketed the phone, tucked the lucky coin into his breast pocket where he could feel its weight over his heart, and walked out of the Rosewood Grand Ballroom with his daughter at his side. Behind them, the party continued, but Grant didn't look back. For the first time in years, he was looking forward, toward breakfast with his daughter, toward conversations about painting and dreams, toward learning who Iris had become and who she wanted to be, toward the kind of success that couldn't be measured in dollars or deals, but in moments like this. Moments when you chose love over obligation, presence over performance, connection over achievement. The night air hit them as they stepped outside, cool and clean after the stuffy perfection of the ballroom. Grant's driver pulled up immediately, the town car gleaming under the streetlights. "Where to, Mr. Halston?" the driver asked. Grant looked at Iris and she smiled, that same radiant smile from the dance floor, the one that made her look exactly like she used to before the world taught her to hide. "The first diner you see," Grant said, "the kind that looks like it's been there forever and serves breakfast 24 hours a day." "I know just the place," the driver said, and pulled away from the curb. As they drove through the city streets, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights blur past. And in his pocket, Grant felt the weight of his brother's coin, a reminder that courage meant choosing connection over comfort, vulnerability over success, love over everything else the world insisted mattered more. The Sunrise Diner lived up to its name in ways that had nothing to do with the actual sun, which wouldn't make an appearance for another 9 hours. It occupied a corner lot in a neighborhood that had seen better decades, wedged between a laundromat and a shop that sold used electronics. The building wore its age openly, chrome dulled by time, red vinyl booths patched with duct tape in places, and a neon sign that flickered erratically as if it couldn't quite decide whether to stay lit or give up entirely. Grant's driver pulled up to the curb and hesitated, clearly wondering if his employer had lost his mind. In all the years he'd worked for Grant Halston, he'd never once been asked to stop at a place like this. Country clubs? Yes. Michelin-starred restaurants? Certainly. Private dining rooms where deals worth millions got hammered out over aged whiskey and rare steaks. But never a diner with cracked parking lot asphalt and a handwritten sign in the window advertising best meatloaf in town, fight us. "This is perfect," Grant said, opening his door before the driver could get out to do it for him. "Give us 2 hours. Go get yourself some dinner, take a break." "Yes, sir," the driver said, still sounding uncertain. Iris climbed out and stood on the sidewalk, staring at the diner with an expression somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "Dad, are you sure? We could go somewhere." "Somewhere more appropriate for a CEO and his daughter?" Grant finished, raising an eyebrow. "Somewhere with cloth napkins and wine lists and waiters who know my name? That's exactly what we're not doing tonight." He pushed open the door and a bell chimed overhead, the sound cheerful and worn. Inside, the diner was exactly what Grant had hoped for, authentically itself, with no pretense or performance. A long counter ran along one wall lined with red vinyl stools that had molded themselves to decades of backsides. Booths occupied the opposite wall, their tables topped with speckled formica that had survived countless spills and scratches. The air smelled like coffee and frying onions and something sweet that might have been pie. There were maybe a dozen other customers scattered throughout the space, a couple of truck drivers nursing coffee at the counter, an elderly woman working through a crossword puzzle in a corner booth, a young couple sharing a basket of fries. No one looked up when Grant and Iris entered. No one recognized the CEO of Halston Industries or cared about the emerald dress that cost more than most of them made in a month. They were just two more people looking for food and a place to sit, and that anonymity felt like freedom. "Anywhere you like, hon," called a waitress from behind the counter. She was maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of face that had seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. Her name tag read Dolores in faded letters. Grant guided Iris to a booth near the back window where they could watch the street and gestured for her to slide in first. The vinyl squeaked under them, and the table wobbled slightly until Grant folded a napkin and wedged it under one leg. Dolores appeared a moment later with 2 plastic menus and a coffee pot. "Coffee?" she asked, already flipping over their cups. "Please," Grant said, and watched as she poured with the efficient economy of someone who'd performed this action 10,000 times. "And whatever pie you recommend." "Apples fresh as of 6 hours ago," Dolores said. Cherry's been here since yesterday, but it's still good. Chocolate cream if you want to get serious about your dessert choices. One of each, Grant decided. We'll share. Dolores raised an eyebrow but wrote it down. Breakfast too, or are we going straight to the important meal? Breakfast, Iris said, speaking up for the first time. Her voice was quieter than in the ballroom, as if she was still adjusting to this new environment. Pancakes? With blueberries if you have them? We got 'em. And for you? Dolores looked at Grant. Same, he said. Pancakes sound perfect. Dolores tucked her order pad into her apron and refilled their coffee cups, even though they hadn't touched them yet. Be about 15 minutes. Holler if you need anything. She walked away, already calling the order back to the kitchen, where someone grunted acknowledgement. Grant wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, feeling its warmth seep into his palms. Across from him, Iris did the same. And for a long moment, they just sat there. Two people learning how to be comfortable in each other's presence without the weight of 5 years' worth of careful avoidance. This is nice, Iris said finally, looking around the diner with something like wonder. I'd forgotten places like this existed, places where nobody cares who you are or what you look like, or how much money you have. I'd forgotten too, Grant admitted. Or maybe I never really knew. I've spent so many years in places where everything matters, where every conversation is a negotiation and every meal is a networking opportunity, that I forgot what it's like to just exist without performance. Iris traced the edge of a crack in the formica with her fingertip. Is that exhausting? Always being Grant Halston, CEO, instead of just being yourself? The question landed with unexpected weight, forcing Grant to consider something he'd avoided examining too closely. Sometimes, he said slowly, but I think I stopped noticing the exhaustion after a while. It just became normal, the way you get used to wearing uncomfortable shoes if you wear them long enough. You forget what it feels like to walk without pain. And now? Iris asked, meeting his eyes. Tonight, walking out of that gala, did that feel like taking off uncomfortable shoes? Grant smiled despite himself. Yeah, it did. Though I'm probably going to get some angry calls tomorrow from board members who expected me to stay until the end. Will that cause problems for you? Leaving your own event? Probably, Grant said, and discovered he didn't care. But I've been causing problems for myself for years by choosing work over everything else. Might as well start causing different kinds of problems. Better problems. Dolores returned with 3 plates of pie, each slice generous enough to qualify as a meal on its own. She set them down with a practiced flourish and pulled out a stack of forks from her apron. You change your mind about that breakfast, just holler. We won't, Grant assured her and picked up a fork. Thank you. He cut into the apple pie first and offered the fork to Iris. She accepted it, tasting carefully, and her eyes widened. Oh my God, that's amazing. Where has this been all my life? Right here, apparently, Grant said, trying the cherry next. On a corner in a neighborhood I've probably driven past 100 times without noticing. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, working their way through all 3 slices with the unself-conscious enjoyment of people who'd stopped worrying about appearances. The chocolate cream was rich enough to be dangerous, and the cherry had a tartness that cut through the sweetness perfectly. The apple, though. The apple tasted like something Grant's mother used to make when he and David were kids, back before money and success and tragedy had complicated everything. Tell me about your painting, Grant said as Iris scraped up the last of the chocolate cream. Earlier you mentioned you paint memories. What does that mean? Iris set down her fork and considered the question, her expression thoughtful. I guess it means I paint places where I felt safe, places where the world made sense before everything changed. She paused, gathering courage. After the accident, when I was in the hospital and then during recovery, I felt like I'd lost myself. Like the person I'd been had died in that car, and I didn't know who I was supposed to be anymore. So I started painting places where I'd been happy, trying to find my way back to that version of myself. Did it work? Grant asked gently. Sometimes. For little moments when I was lost in the work, I could remember what it felt like to be whole. But then I'd finish the painting and look at it and realize I was just trying to live in the past because I was too scared to exist in the present. She looked down at her hands, scarred on one side from gripping the steering wheel during the crash. I've painted the beach house in Maine probably 50 times. Different seasons, different times of day, different angles, But it's always the same place, the same memory. Mom reading on the porch, you and Uncle David building that ridiculous bonfire, me hunting for sea glass along the shore. Grant felt his throat tighten at the mention of David. The beach house had been their father's, a rambling structure that had been in the family for 3 generations. They'd sold it after their parents died, unable to maintain it and unwilling to let strangers rent out their memories. I miss that place, he said quietly. Miss those summers when everything seemed simple. Nothing was actually simple, Iris pointed out. We just didn't see the complicated parts because we were kids, and Mom and Dad did all the hard work of making life look easy. But I understand what you mean. There was a feeling there, a sense of belonging and safety that I've been trying to recapture ever since. Dolores arrived with their pancakes, massive stacks topped with butter, and accompanied by a pitcher of syrup that probably contained more sugar than medical professionals would recommend. Enjoy, she said, already moving on to refill coffee for the truck drivers at the counter. Grant cut into his pancakes and watched steam rise from the fluffy interior. What would you paint now? If you weren't trying to recapture the past, what would you create? Iris poured syrup over her stack with careful deliberation, watching it pool and spread. I don't know, she admitted. That's part of what scares me about moving forward. I've been hiding for so long that I don't know what I actually want anymore. Don't know what makes me happy beyond feeling safe. Then maybe, Grant suggested carefully, that's what you paint. The not knowing. The process of figuring it out. The feeling of standing at the edge of something new and being both terrified and curious. Iris looked up sharply, surprise clear in her expression. That's a good idea. I never thought about painting the uncertainty. Always assumed art was supposed to be about beauty or meaning or capturing some perfect moment. Some art is, Grant said, but the art that means something, the art that changes people, is usually about truth. And right now your truth is that you're scared and scarred and trying to figure out how to live again. That's worth painting. That's worth sharing. They ate their pancakes while the diner hummed with quiet life around them. The elderly woman finished her crossword and left a few dollars on the table, waving at Dolores on her way out. The young couple paid their bill and departed hand in hand, laughing about something. One of the truck drivers ordered a slice of pie to go, chatting with Dolores about road conditions and weather forecasts. Normal life, Grant thought. This was what normal looked like. People going about their nights, having conversations that weren't negotiations, eating food that wasn't trying to impress anyone. He'd been so disconnected from this version of existence that being here now felt almost foreign, like visiting a country whose language he'd once spoken fluently but had since forgotten. Dad, Iris said, pulling him out of his thoughts. Can I ask you something about the accident? Grant set down his fork, giving her his full attention. Anything. Why did you blame yourself? The question came out quietly but firmly, as if she'd been holding it for years and finally found the courage to release it. I know you did. I saw it in how you looked at me in the hospital, how you couldn't meet my eyes when the doctors were explaining the surgeries. You acted like you'd somehow caused it. Grant felt something crack open inside him, a place he'd been carefully protecting since the night he got the call that his daughter had been in a critical accident. Because I should have been there, he said, the words rough with old guilt. You were driving back from that gallery opening in the city, the one where your friend was showing her work. You'd asked me to come with you, said you didn't want to drive home alone in the dark, but I had a meeting, some negotiation that seemed critical at the time, and I told you I couldn't make it. Dad, let me finish, Grant said, needing to say this, needing her to understand. If I'd been with you, I would have been driving. You wouldn't have been behind the wheel when that other car lost control. Or maybe I would have seen the ice earlier, reacted differently, done something to prevent the crash. Instead, I chose a business meeting over my daughter's safety, and you paid the price for that choice. Iris reached across the table and grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. That's not how fault works, Dad. You didn't cause the accident. The ice caused it. The other driver losing control caused it. Bad timing and physics and terrible luck caused it. Your meeting didn't make it happen. I know that intellectually, Grant admitted, but emotionally, I've carried the weight of that choice every day since. Wondered if things would have been different if I'd made a different decision. And then when you shut yourself away after the accident, when you stopped working at the company and moved into the guest house and basically disappeared from life, I felt like I'd failed you twice. Once by not being there when you needed me, and again by not knowing how to bring you back. You couldn't bring me back because I wasn't ready to come back, Iris said, and there was a firmness in her voice that reminded Grant of her mother. You wanted to fix me, wanted to make everything better, but healing doesn't work that way. I had to learn how to exist as this new version of myself, the one with scars and trauma and a completely different relationship with the world. And I had to do that work alone because no one else could do it for me. But I could have supported you better, Grant protested. Could have listened instead of trying to solve, could have asked what you needed instead of assuming I knew. You're right, Iris agreed, and the honesty in her admission surprised him. You could have. We both could have done a lot of things differently. But Dad, we can't go back and redo the last 5 years. We can only decide what happens next. And tonight feels like a beginning. Like maybe we're finally ready to actually see each other instead of seeing our own guilt and fear reflected back. Grant squeezed her hand, feeling tears prick at his eyes for the second time that evening. He'd cried more tonight than he had in the decade since his wife's death. All these emotions he'd carefully compartmentalized, suddenly demanding acknowledgement. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely, for all the ways I got it wrong, for being so afraid of losing you that I forgot to actually be present with you. I'm sorry too, Iris said, for shutting you out, for letting fear make all my decisions, for wasting 5 years being too scared to live. But I think we're done with apologizing now. I think we're ready to actually move forward. Dolores materialized beside their booth with the coffee pot. You two need refills, or are we switching to something stronger? I got beer in the back if you're interested. Grant laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuineness. Coffee's perfect, but thank you. Suit yourself. Dolores poured for both of them and gestured at their empty plates. Pie was good? Best we've ever had, Iris said, and meant it. Damn right it was, Dolores said with satisfaction. Been making those pies for 23 years. Got the recipes from my mother, who got them from her mother. Some things are worth preserving exactly as they are. She walked away, and Grant found himself thinking about preservation, about the difference between preserving something because it was valuable and preserving it because you were afraid of change. He'd been trying to preserve Iris and Amber, keep her safe by keeping her static, but people weren't recipes that could be followed exactly. People needed to grow and change and make mistakes and find their own way forward. The studio, Grant said abruptly. The one you mentioned wanting. Let's do it. Not someday, not when you're ready, now. We'll start tomorrow if you want. Hire contractors, design the space exactly how you need it, get whatever equipment and supplies you require. And when it's done, you paint whatever you want to paint. The past, the present, the uncertain future. It's all yours to explore. Iris stared at him, hope and caution warring in her expression. You're serious. You're actually serious about this. Completely serious, Grant confirmed. I've spent 5 years trying to protect you by limiting your world, and all I've done is teach you to make yourself smaller. So I'm done with that. From now on, I'm going to support you in making your world bigger, in whatever way that looks like for you. Even if it means I fail? Iris asked quietly. Even if I create a studio and discover I'm not actually that good at painting? Even if I show my work and people hate it? Even then, Grant said firmly. Because trying and failing is better than never trying at all. And at least if you try, you'll know. You'll have answered the question instead of spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been. Iris's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling through them. Okay, she said, her voice shaky but determined. Okay, let's build a studio. Let's see what happens when I stop painting the past and start painting the present. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, both of them processing the evening's revelations and promises. Outside the diner's window, the city continued its nighttime routine. Cars passing on the street, a few people walking dogs, the occasional siren in the distance. Normal life happening all around them, while inside this small booth, a father and daughter reconstructed their relationship one honest conversation at a time. I met someone tonight, Iris said suddenly, and there was something in her tone that made Grant look up sharply. Obviously. Lucas, but, I felt something I haven't felt in 5 years, something I thought the accident had taken from me permanently. What was that? Grant asked, though he thought he already knew. Possibility, Iris said simply. The possibility that someone could look at me, really look at me, scars and fear and all the broken parts, and choose to see something worth knowing, something worth dancing with. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I know it was just one dance. I know he was probably being kind, doing what his wife asked him to do before she died. But for those few minutes on that dance floor, I felt like myself again. Like Iris, not like Grant Halston's damaged daughter, or that poor scarred woman, or any of the other labels people have stuck on me. Grant chose his next words carefully, aware that he was navigating territory that could easily go wrong. Do you want to see him again? I don't know, Iris admitted. Part of me does, desperately. Part of me wants to find out if what I felt was real, or just the euphoria of being seen for the first time in years. But another part of me is terrified. What if I seek him out and discover he was just being polite? What if I read meaning into a kind gesture and embarrass both of us? What if... She stopped, shaking her head. What if I'm still too broken to actually connect with another person? You're not broken, Grant said firmly. You're scarred. Those are different things. Broken means can't function, can't be used, needs to be thrown away. Scarred means you've survived something difficult and carry the evidence of that survival. One is an ending, the other is a continuation of the story. Iris looked at him with surprise and something that might have been pride. When did you get so wise about emotional stuff? The last time we had a real conversation, you were trying to solve my problems with checkbooks and phone calls to plastic surgeons. I learned it from a waiter who asked my daughter to dance, Grant said with a slight smile, and from a coin that my brother wanted me to have, and from walking out of my own gala to eat pancakes at a diner. Sometimes wisdom just means finally paying attention to what's been true all along. So what do I do? Iris asked. About Lucas, I mean. Do I try to find him? Do I wait and see if he reaches out? Do I just accept tonight for what it was and move on? Grant considered this, thinking about David's coin and Sarah's promise and the way Lucas had looked at Iris with such clear recognition of her worth. I think, he said slowly, you do whatever feels honest. If you want to find him, find him. If you're not ready, that's okay too. But don't make your decision based on fear of rejection or embarrassment. Make it based on what you actually want, not what feels safest. What I actually want, Iris repeated, testing the words. I'm not sure I know how to figure that out anymore. I've been making choices based on fear for so long that I don't trust my own instincts. Then start small, Grant suggested. Tomorrow, when you wake up, ask yourself what you want for breakfast. Not what's easiest or healthiest or most reasonable, what you actually want. And then give yourself permission to have it. Do that every day, with small decisions, until you start trusting that the voice inside you asking what you want is worth listening to. Iris absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. Start small, she echoed. I can do that. I think I can do that. Dolores returned one more time, this time with their check. She set it face down on the table and gave them both an appraising look. Don't know what you two were working through tonight, but you look like you made some progress. That's worth celebrating. How did you know we were working through something? Iris asked, curious. Dolores shrugged. Been doing this job for 23 years, like I said. You learn to read people. The way you came in, all tense and careful, like you were walking on ice. The way you're sitting now, looser, more relaxed, something shifted between the pie and the pancakes. She smiled slightly. Plus, I saw you holding hands across the table earlier. Whatever it was, you came through it together. That's the important part. She walked away before either of them could respond, leaving them with a check that totaled less than $30 and a server's wisdom that was worth considerably more. Grant pulled out his wallet and dropped $200 bills on the table. Iris's eyes widened. Dad, that's appropriate, Grant said firmly. For the pie, for the pancakes, for the space to have this conversation, and for Dolores's observation that we came through something together. Sometimes you can't measure the value of an experience in dollars, but you can acknowledge it. They slid out of the booth and headed for the door, both of them moving slowly as if reluctant to leave this small pocket of peace they'd found. At the counter, Dolores called out, "Come back anytime. Kitchen's open 24 hours and the coffee's always fresh." "We will," Grant promised, and meant it. Outside, this night air had taken on the particular coolness that came in the hours before dawn. Grant's driver was parked across the street, the town car gleaming under a streetlight. When he saw them emerge, he started the engine and pulled up to the curb. But before they got in the car, Iris grabbed her father's arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for tonight, for listening, for leaving the gala, for bringing me here, for seeing me and letting me see you. I know it wasn't easy to walk away from your responsibilities. The only responsibility that matters is the one I have to you," Grant said. "Everything else is just business, and business will still be there tomorrow. But this moment, this night, only happens once. I'm glad we didn't waste it." They climbed into the car and the driver pulled away from the curb, heading back toward Grant's estate where Iris's guest house waited. But somehow, the guest house didn't feel like a hiding place anymore. It felt like a temporary station, a place to rest before embarking on the next phase of her journey. "When we get home," Iris said as they drove through the quiet streets, "can I show you my paintings? The ones I've been working on?" "I'd love that," Grant said, and felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee or pie. His daughter was inviting him into her world, sharing the work she'd created during her years of solitude. That trust felt precious and fragile, something to be handled with care. They rode in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the evening's unexpected journey. Grant touched the coin in his pocket, feeling its solid weight, imagining David's satisfaction at finally delivering his message across the barrier of death. His brother had known what Grant needed to hear, and somehow, through Lucas Reed and a chance encounter at a charity gala, that message had finally reached its destination. Choose connection over success. Choose presence over performance. Choose love over everything else the world insists matters more. Simple wisdom, really. The kind of thing that should be obvious but somehow got lost in the pursuit of wealth and status and achievement. Grant had built an empire by ignoring those principles, measuring his worth in market shares and quarterly profits and deals closed. But tonight, sitting in a diner with his daughter, he'd remembered what actually mattered, and that remembering felt like waking up from a long sleep, like seeing clearly after years of looking through fog. The car pulled through the gates of Grant's estate, and they drove up the long driveway flanked by ancient oaks. The main house loomed ahead, all stone and windows and architectural significance. But Grant's eyes went to the smaller structure off to the right, the guest house where Iris had been living for the past 3 years, gradually making herself smaller and quieter and more invisible. Not anymore, he thought fiercely. Not ever again. "Come on," Iris said as the car stopped. "Let me show you what I've been creating while you thought I was just hiding." She led him to the guest house, unlocking the door and flipping on lights that revealed a space that had been transformed into a working studio. Canvases lined the walls, some finished and some still in progress. Paints and brushes occupied a corner work table, organized with the careful attention of someone who took their craft seriously. The air smelled like linseed oil and turpentine and creative effort. Grant stood in the doorway, stunned by the sheer volume of work his daughter had produced. Dozens of paintings, maybe hundreds, each one depicting some scene from memory or imagination. The beach house appeared multiple times, as Iris had mentioned, but there were other subjects too. City streets at twilight, forest paths dappled with sunlight, abandoned buildings reclaimed by nature, faces of people who might have been real or imagined. "Iris," he breathed, moving closer to examine a canvas that showed a lighthouse standing against a storm. The technique was sophisticated, the use of light and shadow masterful, the emotional content palpable. "These are extraordinary. How did I not know you could do this?" "Because I never showed you," Iris said simply. "Because I was ashamed that while you were building a company and changing industries, I was hiding in your guest house painting pictures. It felt indulgent and pointless, like I was wasting my potential." "This isn't wasting potential," Grant said firmly, gesturing at the walls covered in her work. "This is using it. This is taking your talent and your pain and your experience and transforming it into something beautiful and true. Iris, you're not just good at this, you're legitimately talented. These paintings deserve to be seen." Iris hugged herself, vulnerability clear in her posture. "You really think so? You're not just saying that because you're my father. I'm saying it because it's true, Grant said. And I'm saying it as someone who's bought expensive art from famous galleries and never felt what I'm feeling right now looking at your work. This matters, Iris. What you've created here matters. She started crying then, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Grant pulled her close, holding his daughter while she released 5 years of hidden grief and secret hope and carefully protected dreams. She cried for the time she'd lost, for the confidence the accident had stolen, for every moment she'd believed she was broken beyond repair. And when the tears finally subsided, when she pulled back and wiped her face with the back of her hand, she was smiling. I want to show these, she said, her voice rough but determined. Not next year or someday or when I feel ready. Soon. I want people to see what I've been creating, want to find out if anyone besides my father thinks they're worth looking at. They will, Grant promised. But even if they don't, even if the critics hate every canvas and no one buys a single painting, you'll have tried. You'll have put yourself out there and risked judgment and refusal, and that courage is worth more than any commercial success. Iris looked at him with something like awe. Who are you, and what have you done with my father? The man I knew would have already been making calls to gallery owners and art critics, pulling strings to guarantee a successful show. Grant smiled ruefully. That man still exists, and trust me, the temptation to make those calls is strong. But I'm trying to be different, trying to support instead of direct, to encourage instead of control. If you want introductions to gallery owners, I'll make them, but only if you ask. This is your art, your career, your choice. I'm just here to cheer from the sidelines and provide whatever help you actually want. I might want some help, Iris admitted. I don't know anything about the art world beyond what I learned in school, but I want to learn by doing, not by having everything handed to me. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Grant said. We'll figure it out together. One honest conversation at a time, one painting at a time, one step forward at a time. They spent the next hour looking through Iris's portfolio, discussing techniques and inspiration and the stories behind specific pieces. Grant asked questions and listened to answers, learned about his daughter's creative process, understood for the first time the depth of talent she possessed. And with each painting they examined, each story she shared, he felt the distance between them continuing to shrink until they stood side by side, not as CEO and damaged daughter, but as two people learning to see each other clearly. Finally, as exhaustion began to catch up with them both, Grant moved toward the door. Get some sleep, he said gently. Tomorrow, we'll start planning the studio conversion, and you can begin thinking about which pieces you'd want to show first. Dad, Iris said, stopping him before he could leave. Thank you. For everything tonight, for dancing with me, for leaving your gala, for the diner, for looking at my work and actually seeing it, for being brave enough to be different than you've been. Thank you for giving me the chance to try, Grant said, for being patient with me while I figured out what actually mattered, and for reminding me that David was right. Success means nothing if you're successful alone. He pulled the coin from his pocket and held it up to the light, watching it gleam. I'm going to keep this with me from now on. A reminder to choose connection over achievement, to measure wealth in moments like tonight instead of quarterly profits. He'd be proud of you, Iris said softly. Uncle David, he'd be proud of the choice you made tonight. I hope so, Grant said. I really hope so. He walked back to the main house through the darkness, feeling lighter than he had in years despite the emotional weight of the evening's conversations. Above him, stars scattered across the clear sky, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal night sounds in a normal world, and Grant was grateful to finally feel present in it. Inside his house, too large for one person really, rattling with emptiness and expensive furniture, Grant climbed the stairs to his bedroom and stood at the window looking out at the guest house where lights still glowed. His daughter was in there, probably looking at her paintings with new eyes, imagining what it might feel like to share them with the world. And tomorrow, Grant would start helping make that happen. Not by pulling strings or making calls that guaranteed success, but by supporting her process, listening to her needs, and trusting that she knew what she wanted even when she wasn't completely certain. It was a different kind of fathering than he'd practiced before, requiring patience instead of action, trust instead of control. But tonight had taught him that different didn't mean wrong. Sometimes different meant finally getting it right after years of getting it wrong. Grant changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, exhausted but satisfied in ways he couldn't fully articulate. He set David's coin on his nightstand where he'd see it first thing in the morning, a physical reminder of the promises he'd made to his brother, to his daughter, and to himself. Tomorrow would bring complications, certainly. There would be calls from the board asking why he'd abandoned the gala, questions about priorities and commitment and leadership. There would be decisions to make about the studio conversion, conversations with contractors and designers, practical matters that needed attention. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight he'd reclaimed his daughter and remembered what it meant to actually live instead of just exist. Tonight he'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away from what everyone expected in order to choose what actually mattered. And that lesson, delivered by a waiter with scarred hands and a little girl in a pink dress, was worth more than every deal Grant had ever closed, every success he'd ever achieved, every dollar he'd ever earned. He turned off the light and closed his eyes. And for the first time in 5 years, Grant Halston slept without the weight of helpless guilt pressing down on his chest. Morning came too early and exactly on time, sunlight streaming through Grant's bedroom windows with the persistence of something that couldn't be ignored or postponed. He woke to the sound of his phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. 7 missed calls already, all from board members and senior executives who'd apparently discovered that abandoning your own charity gala was considered poor form in corporate circles. Grant picked up the phone, looked at the string of increasingly urgent messages, and set it back down without reading them. Whatever fires were burning could wait until after coffee and a conversation with his daughter about contractors and studio designs. Priorities had shifted overnight, and the business world would simply have to adjust to that shift, whether it liked it or not. He showered and dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, casual Friday attire that felt almost rebellious after decades of tailored suits and power ties. David's coin went into his pocket where it settled with comfortable weight, a talisman against backsliding into old patterns. Then Grant made his way downstairs to the kitchen where his longtime housekeeper, Margaret, was already preparing breakfast. "Mr. Halston," she said with barely concealed surprise. "I didn't expect to see you before 8 o'clock on a weekday, and certainly not dressed so casually." "New routine, Margaret," Grant said, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd brewed. "I'm spending the day with Iris. We have plans." Margaret's expression softened in a way that suggested she approved of this development more than she'd ever say directly. She'd worked for the Halston family for 20 years, had watched Iris grow up and then retreat into isolation, had witnessed Grant's increasingly desperate attempts to fix what he didn't understand how to heal. "That's lovely, sir. Shall I prepare breakfast for 2? "Make it 3, Grant said. "I'm going to see if Iris is awake, and if she is, I thought we might invite Lucas Reed and his daughter to join us. Do you remember the waiter from last night's gala?" Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "The one who asked Miss Iris to dance? The entire staff was talking about it. Quite the moment, from what I heard." "Quite the moment," Grant agreed, "and quite the man. Turns out he served with David in Afghanistan. Saved his life, actually, before David died in that second explosion." Margaret set down the whisk she'd been using to beat eggs, her hand going to her chest. "Oh, Mr. Halston, what an extraordinary connection. Does Miss Iris know?" "She does. We talked about it last night, among other things. Talked more honestly than we have in 5 years, really." Grant smiled despite the exhaustion tugging at him. "So yes, let's invite them for breakfast if they're available. I'd like to thank Lucas properly, and Iris seemed interested in seeing him again." "I'll set the table in the sunroom," Margaret said, already moving with renewed purpose. "It's lovely this time of morning, and less formal than the dining room." Grant carried his coffee out to the guest house, knocking softly on the door. When there was no immediate answer, he worried he'd woken Iris too early. But then the door opened and his daughter stood there, already dressed in paint-stained jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. "Dad," she said, surprise and pleasure mixing in her tone. "I didn't expect you so early." "Couldn't sleep much," Grant admitted. "Kept thinking about studio designs and gallery connections, and how many board members are probably drafting strongly worded emails about my disappearance last night." "Are you in trouble?" Iris asked, genuine concern flickering across her features. Probably, Grant said with a shrug that felt liberating, but I'm choosing not to care about that right now. Instead, I'm choosing to have breakfast with my daughter and possibly with Lucas Reed and his daughter if we can track them down. What do you think? Iris's expression transformed, hope and nervousness warring for dominance. You want to invite them here? To the estate? I want to thank Lucas properly for what he did last night, Grant said, and I think you want to see him again, even if you're not quite ready to admit it. So yes, I want to invite them. The question is whether you want me to. Iris bit her lip, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that Grant felt his chest tighten. What if he says no? What if last night was just him being kind, and now he thinks we're these weird rich people who can't take a hint? Then he says no, and we have a nice breakfast, just the two of us, Grant said reasonably. But I don't think that's what will happen. I think Lucas is exactly the kind of man who'd appreciate a proper thank you, and I think his daughter would love to see the princess again. Okay, Iris said, the word coming out is barely more than a whisper. Okay, let's invite them. Grant pulled out his phone and realized he had no idea how to contact Lucas Reed. The man had been working as a catering waiter, which meant the hotel would have his information, but calling the Rosewood Grand and asking for an employee's personal number seemed both inappropriate and unlikely to succeed. I might have his number, Iris said suddenly, coloring slightly. After the dance, when we were sitting at your table, Mia made me put my phone number in her dad's phone so we could be friends. And he put his number in mine so I could send him pictures of us dancing that someone took. Grant raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on this development. Instead, he simply held out his hand for Iris's phone. She retrieved it from the guest house and passed it over, her fingers trembling slightly. The contact was listed simply as Lucas, with no last name, and there was indeed a photo attached, a slightly blurry shot someone had captured of Lucas and Iris mid-waltz, both of them smiling at each other with an openness that made Grant's throat tight. His daughter looked happy in that photo, genuinely, unselfconsciously happy. Grant composed a text message, reading it aloud as he typed, Lucas, this is Grant Halston. I got your number from Iris's phone. I hope that's not too forward. I'd like to invite you and Mia to breakfast at my home this morning if you're available. I want to properly thank you for what you did last night, and I think our daughters would enjoy seeing each other again. No pressure if you have other plans, just thought I'd ask. He showed the message to Iris, who nodded approval and hit send before either of them could second-guess the decision. Then they stood there in the morning sunlight, staring at the phone like teenagers waiting for a prom invitation response. This is ridiculous, Iris said after a moment. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and I'm literally holding my breath waiting for a text message. I'm a 62-year-old CEO, and I'm doing the same thing, Grant pointed out. So at least we're ridiculous together. The phone buzzed. Both of them jumped. Lucas's response was characteristically straightforward. We'd be honored. What time and what's the address? Mia's already asking if the princess will be there. Fair warning, she's been talking about last night non-stop since she woke up. Grant felt relief wash through him, followed immediately by something that might have been nervousness. He'd hosted presidents and foreign dignitaries and business moguls worth billions, but the thought of Lucas Reed and his 7-year-old daughter coming to breakfast felt more important than any of those encounters. He texted back the address and, "How's 9 o'clock?" Then added, "And yes, the princess will definitely be there." "They're coming," Grant said unnecessarily, since Iris had been reading over his shoulder. "In about 45 minutes. 45 minutes, Iris repeated, and suddenly she was moving, heading back into the guest house in a near panic. I need to change. I can't wear paint-stained jeans to breakfast with. I need to look. This sweater has a hole in it. Grant watched his daughter disappear into her closet with amused affection. It had been years since he'd seen her care about her appearance beyond the basics of being presentable. The fact that she was fussing over what to wear for Lucas Reed felt like another small victory, another sign of life returning to places that had been dormant too long. "Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself," he called after her. "Lucas saw you in an evening gown last night. I think he'll be fine with whatever you choose." But he understood the impulse. First impressions had already been made, but second impressions mattered too. This was the version of herself she'd be presenting in daylight, in her own space, without the protective covering of a formal event. This was Iris as she actually existed, and that vulnerability required armor of a different kind. 20 minutes later, Iris emerged wearing dark jeans without paint stains and a soft blue sweater that brought out the color in her eyes. She'd left her hair down, letting it fall past her shoulders in waves that partially obscured the scarring on the left side of her face. Not hiding exactly, but not advertising either. A middle ground between her old habit of complete concealment and last night's radical exposure. "You look beautiful," Grant said simply, and meant it. "I look nervous," Iris corrected, but she was smiling. "But I guess that's honest, so it'll have to do." They walked to the main house together, and Grant found himself thinking about all the times over the past 5 years when this simple action, walking side by side with his daughter, had felt laden with unspoken tension and careful distance. This morning, that weight had lifted. They were just two people about to share breakfast with new friends, and that ordinariness felt precious. Margaret had outdone herself. The sunroom table was set with the good china but casual linens, striking a balance between welcoming and formal that suggested this was important but not intimidating. She'd prepared a spread that could feed a small army. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, pastries from the bakery in town, orange juice, and a pot of coffee that filled the air with rich aroma. "Margaret, this is perfect," Grant said. "Thank you." "You're welcome, sir, and might I say—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's lovely to see Miss Iris excited about something again. The staff has been worried about her." Iris looked surprised. "The staff notices me?" "Of course we notice you, dear," Margaret said gently. "We just didn't want to intrude. But we've been hoping you'd find your way back to the world. Seems like maybe you're starting to." Before Iris could respond, the doorbell chimed. Grant glanced at his watch. Exactly 9 o'clock. Punctuality, he thought with approval. Military training showing itself in civilian life. "I'll get it," Grant said, but Iris followed him anyway, both of them heading to the front entrance like a welcoming committee of two. Grant opened the door to find Lucas standing on the wide porch, one hand holding Mia's, the other carrying a small bouquet of flowers that looked like they'd come from a grocery store. He was dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt similar to Grant's, and Mia wore a yellow sundress with white flowers embroidered on the hem. "Mr. Halston," Lucas said, extending his free hand. "Thank you for the invitation. We brought flowers," Mia insisted. "I picked yellow ones because they're happy colors," Mia announced, releasing her father's hand to thrust the bouquet at Iris. "And Daddy said bringing flowers to someone's house is polite, so I wanted to be polite to the princess." Iris knelt down, bringing herself to Mia's level, and accepted the flowers with the kind of reverence usually reserved for precious artifacts. "These are the most beautiful flowers I've ever received," she said seriously. "Thank you, Mia. That was very thoughtful." "You're wearing regular clothes," Mia observed, studying Iris's jeans and sweater. "I liked the green princess dress better, but this is good too. You still look pretty." "Thank you," Iris said, her voice catching slightly. "You look pretty too. Yellow is definitely a happy color." Grant ushered them inside, acutely aware of how Lucas's gaze swept the entrance hall, taking in the high ceilings and original artwork and the staircase that curved up to the second floor. It was the kind of wealth that announced itself without words, the accumulation of success and good investments and inherited advantages. Grant had stopped noticing it years ago, but seeing it through Lucas's eyes reminded him of the gulf between their circumstances. "Impressive home," Lucas said neutrally, his tone suggesting he was reserving judgment. "It's too big," Grant admitted. "Has been since my wife died. I keep meaning to downsize, but never quite get around to it. Turns out it's easier to maintain a 15-room house than to make decisions about which memories to keep and which to let go." Something in Lucas's expression softened, recognition of shared experience passing between them. "I understand that. Took me 2 years to sort through Sarah's things after she died. Kept finding reasons to put it off because doing it felt like losing her again." They moved to the sunroom where Margaret had laid out breakfast, and Mia gasped at the spread. "Is this all for us? That's so much food." "Margaret believes in being prepared," Grant said with a smile. "Please, help yourselves to whatever looks good." They settled around the table, Grant at the head, Iris on his right, Lucas on his left, with Mia beside him. For a moment, the arrangement felt almost familial, like a snapshot of what breakfast could look like in a different kind of life. Then Mia started loading her plate with bacon, and the spell broke, replaced by the comfortable chaos of people actually eating together. "I wanted to thank you properly," Grant said once everyone had food, "for what you did last night, for seeing my daughter when everyone else chose not to, for being brave enough to ask her to dance, for giving us both a gift we didn't know we needed." Lucas set down his fork, meeting Grant's eyes directly. "You don't need to thank me for basic human decency. I saw someone sitting alone who deserved better, and I made a choice. That's all." "That's not all," Grant disagreed gently. "That's courage in its purest form, choosing kindness when it would be easier to stay silent, extending yourself for someone else's benefit when there's nothing in it for you. That's what David always tried to teach me, and I never quite understood it until last night." "David was good at that," Lucas said quietly. "Good at seeing what needed to be done and doing it without counting the cost. He saved my life once, pulled me out of a burning vehicle while taking fire. Never hesitated, never calculated the risk, just acted because that's who he was." Mia tugged on her father's sleeve. "Is that the friend you told me about? The brave one who died being a hero?" "That's him, sweetheart," Lucas confirmed. "David Halston. He was Mr. Halston's brother." Mia turned to Grant with the solemn expression children adopt when confronting big concepts. "I'm sorry your brother died. My mommy died too, so I know it's really sad. But Daddy says people who are brave and kind never really leave because we remember them, and that keeps them alive in our hearts." Grant felt tears prick at his eyes for what seemed like the 100th time in 12 hours. "Your daddy is very wise, Mia, and he's right. Your mommy and my brother, they're still with us in the lessons they taught and the love they shared." "That's what Daddy says," Mia agreed, returning her attention to her bacon. "He says Mommy wanted him to be brave about being kind, so he tries really hard. Sometimes it's scary, but he does it anyway because promises to people you love are the most important kind." Iris had gone very still, her gaze fixed on Lucas with an intensity that made Grant think she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as a waiter who'd asked her to dance, but as a whole person with his own grief and courage and complicated navigation of loss. "You must miss her very much," Iris said softly. "Every day," Lucas admitted. "But Mia's right. Sarah made me promise to stay brave about kindness even when it was uncomfortable. Said that was the only way to live a life that mattered, so I try to keep that promise. Try to teach Mia the same lesson. Try to be the kind of person Sarah believed I could be." "Is that why you asked me to dance?" Iris asked. "Because of the promise." Lucas considered the question seriously, his gaze steady on hers. "Partly, but also because you reminded me of myself after Sarah died. That look of someone who's present but disconnected, watching life happen around them without feeling part of it. And I remembered how alone that felt, how desperately I wanted someone to see me and acknowledge that I was still here, still mattering, still worth including. So I asked you to dance because I hoped it might help, might remind you that being seen was still possible." "It did," Iris said, her voice thick with emotion. "It helped more than you know. More than I knew was possible, actually. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be looked at and seen as something other than damaged or pitiful or tragic." "You're not any of those things," Lucas said firmly. "You're someone who survived something terrible and carried the evidence of that survival. That's strength, not weakness. That's courage, not brokenness." Grant watched this exchange with fascination, seeing something develop between his daughter and this man that went beyond gratitude or attraction. It was recognition, the deep kind that happens when two people who've walked similar paths find each other and realize they're not as alone as they thought. Whether it became something more or simply remained a meaningful connection didn't matter as much as the fact that it existed at all. "Can I see your house?" Mia asked Iris, apparently finished with the heavy conversation topics. "Daddy said you live in a princess house on the property. Is it pink? Do you have a tower?" Iris laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "It's not quite a princess house, more like a guest cottage, but it does have big windows and a lot of light, and I've turned it into an art studio. Would you like to see my paintings?" "You paint?" Mia's eyes went wide. "Like with colors and brushes? Can you paint a picture of me? I could try, Iris said, glancing at Lucas for permission. If your dad says it's okay, and you can sit still for a little while. She won't sit still, Lucas warned, but he was smiling. But she'd love to see your studio. We both would, if you're willing to share. They finished breakfast with conversation flowing more easily now, the initial awkwardness giving way to genuine connection. Mia entertained them with stories about her school and her friends and a hamster named Mr. Whiskers, who'd recently learned to use his exercise wheel. Grant asked Lucas about his work and learned that he'd picked up an additional shift at the apartment complex, handling minor repairs and maintenance calls. You're good with your hands, Grant observed. Did you learn that in the military? Some of it, Lucas said, but mostly from my grandfather. He was a carpenter, believed that a man should know how to fix things instead of calling someone else to do it. Spent my teenage summers working with him, learning how to use tools properly. Turns out those skills are more valuable than I realized. There's always something that needs repairing, and people will pay for competence. Would you ever want to do it full-time? Grant asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. Start your own business, maybe? Handyman services or property maintenance? Lucas shrugged. I've thought about it, but starting a business requires capital and time and energy. I'm not sure I have right now. Being a single parent to a 7-year-old doesn't leave a lot of room for entrepreneurial risk. What if someone provided the capital? Grant said carefully, aware he was treading into territory that could easily be misinterpreted. What if someone believed in your skills enough to invest in getting you started? Not charity, he added quickly, seeing Lucas's expression close slightly. Investment, a loan you'd pay back once the business was profitable, or a partnership arrangement where I provided startup funding and you provided the expertise. Dad, Iris said warningly, clearly worried he was pushing too hard too fast. But Lucas was considering the offer seriously, his gaze assessing Grant's face as if trying to determine the real motivation behind the proposal. Why would you do that? He asked bluntly. We barely know each other. For all you know, I'd take your money and disappear. You won't, Grant said with certainty, because you're a man who keeps his promises, who honors his commitments, who pulls people out of burning vehicles even when it puts you at risk. That's the kind of person I'd want to partner with, someone whose character I can trust even if I don't know all the details of their business plan. This is because of David, Lucas said, and it wasn't quite a question. Because I served with your brother and saved his life. Partly, Grant admitted, echoing Lucas's earlier words to Iris, but also because you gave me something invaluable last night. You reminded me what actually matters, delivered a message my brother wanted me to hear, and helped me reconnect with my daughter. That's worth more than any amount of money I could invest in a business. And honestly, I think you'd be good at it. I think you'd build something sustainable and honest. Treat your clients fairly, do quality work. That's increasingly rare, and it's worth supporting. Lucas sat back in his chair, processing. Mia had finished eating and was now quietly drawing on a napkin with a pen someone had provided, creating what appeared to be a very elaborate picture of a princess in a yellow dress. Around them, the sunroom glowed with morning light, and somewhere outside, birds were singing their territorial declarations. I'd need to think about it, Lucas said finally. Talk with some people I trust, maybe run some numbers, figure out if it's actually feasible. But I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need time to consider whether this is the right move for me and Mia. That's fair, Grant said, relieved that Lucas hadn't rejected the idea outright. Take whatever time you need. The offer doesn't have an expiration date. Can we go see the paintings now? Mia asked, looking up from her drawing. I'm done with breakfast and I want to see what the princess makes. They cleared the table together, Lucas insisting on helping despite Margaret's protests, and then made their way out to the guest house. Iris led them inside with visible nervousness, suddenly conscious of how her workspace might appear to fresh eyes. But if Lucas and Mia were intimidated by the sheer volume of work covering every available surface, they didn't show it. Wow, Mia breathed, spinning in a slow circle to take it all in. You made all of these? By yourself? All by myself, Iris confirmed. Over the past few years, whenever I couldn't sleep or needed to work through something difficult, I'd paint. Mia moved closer to examine a canvas showing a beach at sunset, the sky painted in layers of orange and pink and purple. This one's my favorite. It looks like the ocean is smiling. Lucas walked slowly through the space, pausing to really look at each piece. Unlike the casual observers at a gallery who might give each painting a few seconds of attention, he studied them, taking in composition and technique and emotional content with the focus of someone who understood that art was meant to be experienced, not just viewed. "These are remarkable, look," he said finally, and his tone carried genuine admiration. "You've got a real gift, Iris. These aren't just technically competent, they're emotionally resonant. You can feel what you were feeling when you painted them." Iris flushed with pleasure and embarrassment. "I wasn't sure anyone besides my dad would see that. I thought maybe I was just being self-indulgent, painting my feelings instead of anything meaningful." "Feelings are meaningful," Lucas said firmly, "especially feelings about loss and hope and learning to exist in the world again after trauma changes you. That's universal. That's what makes art matter. Not perfect technique, but honest expression of real human experience." Grant watched his daughter absorb this validation from someone who had no obligation to provide it, who had nothing to gain from encouraging her. Lucas's words meant more than a dozen gallery owners' polite praise because they came from a place of genuine recognition. He saw what Iris was trying to express, and he valued it. "Would you really paint me?" Mia asked, returning to stand beside Iris. "I'd sit really still. I can sit still for a whole 5 minutes without moving, probably." Iris laughed and knelt down to Mia's level. "Tell you what, how about I paint you while you're playing or moving around? I could capture you being yourself instead of asking you to freeze like a statue. Would that work?" "That would be even better," Mia said enthusiastically. "When can we start?" "How about next week?" Iris suggested, glancing at Lucas for confirmation. "If your dad says it's okay, you could come over one afternoon after school, and I'll paint while you play in the garden or draw your own pictures. It'll be fun." Lucas nodded his approval, and Mia immediately launched into plans for what she'd wear and what she'd bring, and whether Mr. Whiskers the hamster could be in the painting too. Iris handled this enthusiasm with remarkable patience, clearly charmed by the little girl's unfiltered excitement. They spent another hour in the studio, with Iris explaining her process and showing them works in various stages of completion. Lucas asked intelligent questions about technique and materials, revealing that he knew more about art than his blue-collar background might suggest. When Iris asked about it, he smiled and explained that Sarah had been an art teacher before she got sick, that their home had been filled with canvases and paint supplies and constant creative energy. "She would have loved your work," Lucas said quietly, standing before a painting of a forest path disappearing into shadow. "Would have appreciated how you use light and darkness to create emotional depth. She always said the best artists painted feelings, not just images." "I wish I could have met her," Iris said, and meant it. "I wish that too," Lucas replied. "I think you two would have been friends." Eventually they made their way back to the main house where Grant suggested a walk around the property. The estate sprawled across 15 acres of carefully maintained grounds, with gardens and walking paths and a small pond that had been there since his grandfather's time. They strolled in comfortable pairs, Grant and Lucas discussing business possibilities and military stories, Iris and Mia creating elaborate games that involved jumping over cracks in the pathway and counting different colored flowers. "This is a good life you've built," Lucas said as they walked. "Despite the size of the house and the obvious wealth, it feels like you're trying to figure out what actually matters. That's more than most people in your position ever manage." "I'm trying," Grant agreed. "Finally trying. After years of prioritizing all the wrong things. My brother would be pleased, I think. Annoyed it took me this long, but pleased." "David was always direct about that stuff," Lucas remembered. "He'd tell you straight if he thought you were screwing up. But he'd also help you fix it, never just criticized without offering solutions." They walked in silence for a moment, watching Iris and Mia ahead of them, seeing them laugh about something only they found funny. Then Lucas spoke again, his tone more serious. "About your offer, the business investment. I want you to know I'm genuinely considering it, but I need you to understand something first." "All right," Grant said, waiting. "I'm not a project," Lucas said carefully but firmly. "I'm not someone you need to rescue or fix or elevate as penance for whatever guilt you're carrying about your brother or your daughter. If we do this, if I accept your investment, it has to be because you genuinely believe in the business concept and my ability to execute it, not because you're trying to pay some kind of cosmic debt." Grant absorbed this, respecting the boundary Lucas was establishing. Fair enough. So let me be clear. I do genuinely believe you'd build something valuable. I've spent 30 years evaluating people and business opportunities, and I'm good at identifying competence and integrity. You have both. Add in your technical skills and your understanding of what people need, and you've got the foundation for a successful service business. The investment makes sense on its own merits. And the personal connection? Lucas pressed. The fact that I knew David and asked your daughter to dance? Makes me more inclined to offer, Grant admitted. But wouldn't be enough on its own if I didn't think you'd succeed. I'm trying to be different than I've been, trying to prioritize people over profits. But I'm still a businessman at heart. I still make decisions based on whether they make strategic sense. Lucas nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with this answer. Then I'll seriously consider it. Let me put together some projections, figure out what startup capital would be required, create a timeline for profitability. If the numbers work and you're still interested, we can talk about terms. That sounds perfect, Grant said, and felt a spark of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Not about potential returns or market opportunities, but about being part of something that helped someone build a better life for themselves and their child. About using his resources to create possibility instead of just accumulating more wealth he didn't need. They completed the loop back to the main house, where Margaret had prepared a light lunch despite the substantial breakfast they'd consumed earlier. Mia was starting to flag, her earlier enthusiasm giving way to the drowsiness that hit 7-year-olds after big social outings. Lucas noticed and made noises about needing to head home, let Mia take a nap, get back to normal routine. At the door, Iris hugged Mia goodbye and promised to text Lucas about next week's painting session. Then, surprising herself as much as anyone else, she hugged Lucas too. A quick embrace that she pulled away from almost immediately, her face flushed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For last night, for this morning, for seeing my work and understanding what I was trying to express. It means more than I can properly explain." "Thank you for sharing it with us," Lucas replied. "And for giving Mia someone new to idolize. She's going to talk about the princess who paints for weeks." After they left, Grant and Iris stood together on the porch, watching Lucas's elderly sedan make its way down the long driveway. It was a companionable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've recently rediscovered how to be comfortable with each other. "You like him," Grant observed, not quite making it a question. "I do," Iris admitted, "though I'm not sure what that means yet. If it means anything beyond gratitude and recognition and the beginning of friendship." "It doesn't have to mean anything right now," Grant said. "It can just be what it is, a connection worth exploring, a possibility worth considering, a door that's opened that you can choose to walk through or not." "When did you get so wise about relationships?" Iris asked, bumping his shoulder gently with hers. "When I stopped trying to control them and started trying to understand them," Grant said, "which was approximately 12 hours ago, so don't give me too much credit. I'm learning as I go." They went back inside and Grant finally allowed himself to check his phone. The messages were exactly as dire as he'd expected. The board was not happy about his disappearance, several major clients were requesting meetings, and his assistant had sent increasingly frantic updates about tomorrow's schedule. The machinery of his professional life was demanding attention, insisting that personal concerns take a backseat to business imperatives. Grant looked at the messages, felt the familiar pull of obligation and responsibility, and made a conscious choice. He called his assistant and began the process of reorganizing his calendar, pushing meetings, delegating decisions, creating space for the things that had suddenly become more important than quarterly earnings and market position. "Cancel my morning meetings for the rest of the week," he said, ignoring her gasp of surprise, "and see if you can reschedule the board meeting for next month. I need time to focus on some personal matters that can't be postponed any longer." "Mr. Halston, the board is already upset about last night. Then they'll be even more upset, and we'll deal with it when we deal with it," Grant said firmly. "I'm not abandoning my responsibilities, Jennifer. I'm just redefining what my responsibilities actually are. The company will survive a few days without my constant attention. My relationship with my daughter might not survive if I don't give it the priority it deserves right now." There was a pause, then Jennifer's voice came back softer. "I understand, sir. I'll handle the rescheduling, and for what it's worth, I'm glad you're doing this. Some things matter more than business." Grant ended the call and turned to find Iris watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're really doing this," she said wonderingly. "You're actually choosing me over the company." "I'm choosing correctly for the first time in a long time," Grant corrected. "Choosing what David tried to tell me mattered. Choosing what last night reminded me was valuable. Choosing to be your father instead of Grant Halston, CEO, who happens to have a daughter." Iris's eyes filled with tears again, and Grant opened his arms. She stepped into his embrace, and they stood there in the entrance hall of his too-large house, father and daughter, finally learning how to prioritize each other after years of careful distance and mutual protection. Outside, the day continued its progression toward afternoon, and somewhere in the city, Lucas Reed was putting his daughter down for a nap while thinking about business plans and new possibilities. In a few days, Iris would paint Mia's portrait while Grant met with contractors about converting the carriage house into a proper studio. In a few weeks, Lucas would present his business proposal, and Grant would become an investor in something that mattered beyond profit margins. But right now, in this moment, none of that had happened yet. Right now, there was just this: a father holding his daughter, both of them learning that change was possible, that growth could happen at any age, that it was never too late to choose differently than you'd chosen before, and that choosing love, choosing connection, choosing presence over performance, that was the bravest thing either of them had ever done. The following Thursday arrived with the kind of golden afternoon light that painters dream about, streaming through the guest house windows and turning everything it touched into a study of warmth and possibility. Iris had spent the morning preparing her workspace, pushing aside finished canvases to create room for the new portrait, selecting brushes and mixing colors that might capture the particular energy of a 7-year-old girl who saw the world as fundamentally magical. She was nervous in a way she hadn't been since before the accident, when exhibitions and critiques had seemed important enough to generate anxiety. But this was different. This wasn't about proving her technical skill or earning validation from strangers who measured art by fashionable standards. This was about capturing something true about Mia Reed, about honoring the trust Lucas had shown by allowing his daughter to spend time with a woman he barely knew, about creating something that might matter to people she was beginning to care about. The doorbell chimed at precisely 3:30, and Iris opened the door to find Mia practically vibrating with excitement, dressed in the yellow sundress she'd worn to breakfast and carrying a small backpack decorated with cartoon butterflies. "I'm here to be painted," Mia announced, bouncing on her toes. "Daddy said I should tell you I had a snack so I won't get hungry and cranky, and I brought some toys in case I need to play, and Mrs. Chen said I should remember my manners and say please and thank you." Lucas stood behind his daughter, one hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was both affectionate and restraining. He was dressed in work clothes, jeans with permanent stains and a t-shirt that had seen better days, and he looked tired in the way that came from physical labor rather than lack of sleep. "Rough day?" Iris asked, stepping aside to let them in. Replaced a water heater and fixed a garbage disposal that had somehow gotten a spoon wedged in it, Lucas said with a wry smile. "Living the glamorous life of apartment maintenance. But I'm here now, and that's what matters." He paused, seeming to realize something. "Unless you wanted me to leave, I can come back in an hour or two if you'd rather work without an audience." "Stay," Iris said quickly, then flushed at her own eagerness. "I mean, if you want to, you could read or something while I work. It might actually help Mia relax if you're here." So Lucas settled into the worn armchair in the corner with a paperback he'd brought, something with a creased spine that suggested multiple readings, while Mia explored the studio with the careful reverence of a child in a space full of beautiful, breakable things. "Can I touch this one?" Mia asked, pointing at a canvas showing a lighthouse standing against storm clouds. "Gently," Iris said. "That paint's dry, so it won't hurt anything. What do you think of it?" Mia studied the painting with surprising focus for someone her age. "I think the lighthouse is brave," she said finally, "because the storm is really big and scary, but the lighthouse just keeps shining anyway, like it's saying, 'I'm still here even when things are hard.'" Iris felt her throat tighten at this assessment. That was exactly what she'd been trying to express when she painted it. The stubborn persistence of light in darkness, the refusal to be extinguished by circumstance. That a 7-year-old had seen and articulated it so clearly felt like a gift. "That's exactly right," Iris said softly. You're very good at seeing what paintings are really about. Mommy taught me, Mia said matter-of-factly. She was an art teacher, and she said that looking at art was like having a conversation with the person who made it. You have to listen with your eyes and feel with your heart. She paused, her expression turning solemn. I miss her a lot, but I remember the things she taught me, so she's still kind of here. From his chair, Lucas made a small sound that might have been agreement or grief or both. Iris met his eyes across the room and saw the particular pain of a parent watching their child process loss with a maturity no child should need. Your mommy was right, Iris said gently, and I think she'd be very proud of you for remembering her lessons. Daddy says that too, Mia said, brightening. He says, as long as we remember people and the things they taught us, they never really leave. They just change form, like how water becomes ice or steam, but it's still water. Iris smiled at this explanation, recognizing Lucas's influence in the metaphor. That's a beautiful way to think about it. Now, are you ready to be painted? Yes! Mia's solemnity vanished, replaced by eager anticipation. What do I do? Should I stand really still? Should I smile? You should play, Iris said, pulling out her sketchbook to begin preliminary studies. I brought some of my old toys from storage. There's a box by the window with dolls and blocks and things. Why don't you play with those, and I'll sketch you while you're being yourself. That way the painting will capture the real Mia, not some frozen version. This approach delighted Mia, who immediately dove into the toy box with the enthusiasm of an archaeologist discovering treasure. She pulled out a set of wooden blocks and began constructing an elaborate tower while providing running commentary about the imaginary kingdom it belonged to and the princess who lived at the top. Iris began to sketch, her hand moving across the paper with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. She captured the way Mia's tongue stuck out slightly when she concentrated, the careful deliberation in her small hands as she balanced blocks, the pure, unself-conscious joy in her expression. These quick studies would form the basis for the portrait, but they were also valuable in themselves, evidence of attention paid, of seeing someone clearly enough to render them honestly. Lucas watched from his chair, his book apparently forgotten. He said nothing, didn't interrupt or offer suggestions, just observed his daughter being seen and recorded by someone who cared enough to do it carefully. After a while, he spoke quietly, pitching his voice so only Iris could hear. This is good for her. Being around someone who treats her creativity like it matters. She's been drawing a lot lately, telling stories about the pictures she makes, but I'm not always sure how to respond beyond, "That's great, honey." You're doing fine, Iris assured him, not looking up from her sketchbook. The fact that you're paying attention, that you're here and present and interested, that's what matters most. Kids don't need expert analysis. They need to know someone's watching, someone cares about what they create. Sarah was better at this part, Lucas admitted. She knew how to ask the right questions, how to encourage without directing. I'm still learning. We're all still learning, Iris said. I certainly am. Until this week, I hadn't shown my work to anyone in 5 years. Hadn't let myself believe that what I created might matter beyond being a coping mechanism. And now? Lucas asked. Iris paused, considering the question seriously. Now I'm starting to think maybe art can be both. Maybe it can be how you cope and also how you connect. Maybe the same paintings that helped me survive my own grief and trauma could help someone else feel less alone in theirs. That's what Sarah used to say, Lucas said, and there was wonder in his voice. She said art was empathy made visible, that when you created something honest about your own experience, you built a bridge to other people's experiences, made them feel seen and understood. She sounds like she was remarkable, Iris said, moving on to a new sketch that captured Mia mid-laugh, responding to some joke only she understood. She was, Lucas agreed, and so are you, though I don't think you quite believe it yet. Give it time. People who've been hiding as long as you have need time to remember their worth being visible. They fell into comfortable silence after that, Lucas eventually returning to his book, while Iris worked through a dozen quick studies of Mia in various poses and expressions. The light shifted as afternoon moved toward evening, growing richer and more golden, painting everything in warm tones that made the studio feel suspended outside normal time. Around 5 o'clock, Grant appeared at the guest house door, having spent the day meeting with contractors about the carriage house conversion. He'd brought takeout from a Thai restaurant in town, enough for all of them plus Margaret, who he'd invited to join them for dinner. I hope I'm not interrupting, Grant said, taking in the scene of concentrated creativity. But I thought you all might be getting hungry. Starving, Iris admitted, setting down her pencil. I got so focused I forgot to eat lunch. They moved to the small table Iris used for meals, and Margaret arrived moments later with plates and silverware from the main house. Dinner became an impromptu celebration of small victories. Grant's successful negotiations with contractors who'd promised to start work next week, Iris's productive afternoon of sketching, Mia's construction of what she insisted was the tallest block tower in recorded history. I've been thinking about the business plan, Lucas said partway through the meal, addressing Grant directly. Ran some numbers, talked to a few people who know the local market. I think there's real potential for a handyman and property maintenance service that focuses on quality work and fair pricing. Most of the competition either charges too much or does shoddy work. There's room for someone who does both parts right. I'd like to see those numbers when you're ready to share them, Grant said, his business instincts engaging despite his recent commitment to prioritize people over profits. But I'm already inclined to invest based on what I know about your character and competence. When do you think you'd want to launch? Within 3 months, if the funding comes through, Lucas said. Give me time to get proper licensing, buy equipment and a work vehicle, put together some marketing materials. Start small with existing contacts, build reputation through word of mouth before expanding. Smart, Grant approved. Sustainable growth beats rapid expansion every time. What would you call it? Lucas smiled slightly. Reed Solutions. Simple, professional, easy to remember. And it has a double meaning, my name and the idea of finding solutions to problems. I like it, Grant said. Has good energy. Projects confidence without arrogance. Mia, who'd been following this conversation with the partial attention of a child more interested in pad thai than business discussions, suddenly perked up. Does this mean we'll have more money? Can we get Mr. Whiskers a bigger cage? Eventually, yes, Lucas said, ruffling her hair. But first we have to build the business and make it successful. That takes time and work. Like how Iris paints lots of pictures before she makes a really good one? Mia asked. Exactly like that, Lucas confirmed. Success is practicing and learning and trying again when things don't work the first time. After dinner, Grant and Margaret cleaned up while Iris showed Lucas the day's sketches. He studied each one carefully, a smile growing across his face as he recognized his daughter captured in pencil and paper. All her energy and curiosity and unself-conscious grace preserved in quick, confident lines. These are incredible, he said finally. You've captured something essential about her, not just what she looks like, but who she is. That's what I was hoping for, Iris said, pleased by his reaction. Tomorrow I'll start the actual painting. It'll take a few sessions to finish, but I think I have enough studies now to work from. Whatever you need, Lucas said. We're not in any hurry. Good art takes time. They lingered over coffee while Mia returned to her block tower, determined to add just 3 more levels before they had to leave. The evening had taken on a quality of comfortable domesticity that surprised everyone present. A CEO and a handyman, a reclusive artist and a precocious child, all occupying the same space without pretense or performance, simply existing together in a moment that felt both ordinary and precious. I should probably head out, Lucas said eventually, checking his watch. It's past Mia's bedtime and tomorrow's a school day. But before they could leave, Grant's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted into something more professional. I'm sorry, I need to take this. It's the board chairman. He stepped outside and through the window they could see him pacing, his posture growing more defensive with each passing minute. When he came back inside, his jaw was tight with frustration. Problem? Iris asked quietly. The board is threatening a vote of no confidence if I don't get back to normal operations immediately, Grant said bluntly. Apparently my absence this week has been noticed and commented on, and several members feel I'm no longer taking my responsibilities seriously. What does that mean? Iris asked, anxiety sharpening her voice. Can they remove you? Technically, yes, Grant admitted, though it would require a 2/3 majority and would be complicated by my ownership stake. But they can make my life difficult, undermine my authority, create conflict that damages the company. He paused, looking at his daughter. They want me back full-time starting Monday. No more abbreviated schedules, no more delegating critical decisions, no more prioritizing personal matters over professional obligations. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Iris felt something inside her begin to crumble. This was the choice she'd feared, the moment when her father would have to decide whether his recent transformation was real or just a temporary aberration caused by emotional circumstances. She'd had 5 days of his attention and presence, 5 days of believing that maybe things had truly changed. But now the machinery of his professional life was demanding he return to form, and she couldn't imagine he'd choose her over the empire he'd spent decades building. "I understand," Iris said quietly, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "You need to go back. The company needs you and I'll be fine. We've had a good week, and that's more than we've had in years. It's enough." "No," Grant said firmly, and there was steel in his voice. "It's not enough. And I'm not going back. Not the way they want me to." Everyone in the room went still. Even Mia stopped building her tower, sensing the weight of the moment. "Dad, you can't risk your company for me," Iris protested. "I won't let you do that." "You're not making me do anything," Grant said. "I'm choosing this. Choosing what matters over what's expected. Choosing to be your father instead of Grant Halston, CEO, who happens to have a daughter. The board can vote however they want. They can try to remove me if they think that's best for the company, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to prioritize the right things." He pulled David's coin from his pocket, holding it up to the light. "My brother tried to teach me this lesson years ago. Told me that success means nothing if you're successful alone, that the only wealth that matters is the people who love you. He died before I learned it, and I've spent the last 12 years proving him right by building a fortune that left me emptier with every dollar I earned. I'm done with that. Done measuring my worth by metrics that don't actually matter." Lucas stood, moving closer to Grant with an expression of deep respect. "That's one of the hardest choices a man can make. Walking away from what you've built, what you've spent your life achieving, because you've realized the foundation was wrong." "I'm not walking away," Grant clarified. "I'm renegotiating the terms. I'll stay on as CEO if the board wants me, but with boundaries that protect what's actually important. Reduced hours, delegation of responsibilities that don't require my direct involvement, genuine work-life balance, instead of giving lip service to the concept. If they can't accept that, if they'd rather have someone who'll sacrifice everything for quarterly earnings, then they can find a new CEO. They'll fight you on this," Lucas warned. "Powerful people don't like being told their priorities are wrong." "Let them fight," Grant said. "I've got resources, leverage, and the particular advantage of not caring whether I win anymore. The worst they can do is remove me, and honestly, that might be the best outcome. Might give me the freedom to actually figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life instead of just doing what I've always done." Iris was crying again, but this time the tears came from relief and pride and a fierce hope that maybe, finally, her father was going to keep the promises he'd made over pancakes and paint-stained sketches. "You're serious about this? You're actually going to stand up to them?" "Completely serious," Grant confirmed. "And if they don't like it, I'll resign. We'll figure it out together, you and me and whatever comes next. Maybe I'll become your business manager when you start showing your work. Maybe I'll invest in small businesses like Lucas's and help other people build things that matter. Maybe I'll finally take that sabbatical I've been promising myself for 20 years. But whatever I do, I'm doing it while being present in your life, while being the father you deserve." Mia, who'd been following this conversation with the partial comprehension of a 7-year-old, spoke up suddenly. "My daddy says being brave means doing the scary thing because it's right, even when people say you shouldn't. You're being brave like he taught me." Grant looked at the little girl and smiled, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Your daddy taught you well, Mia. Sometimes being brave means asking someone to dance, and sometimes it means telling powerful people they're wrong about what matters." The moment stretched, filled with possibility and uncertainty and the particular weight of decisions that would reshape multiple futures. Then Lucas extended his hand to Grant, not as an employee to an employer or a supplicant to a patron, but as one man to another who understood what it cost to choose differently than the world insisted you should. "Whatever happens," Lucas said, "you made the right choice. David would be proud. And more importantly, your daughter will remember that you chose her when it mattered most." They shook hands, and in that gesture passed an understanding that went beyond words. They were both men who'd loved and lost, who'd carried scars both visible and hidden, who'd learned through pain that the only measure of a life well lived was how you treated the people who depended on you. The evening wound down after that, with Lucas and Mia finally heading home and Grant and Iris standing together outside the guest house, looking up at stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Iris asked quietly. "Now I call the board chairman back and tell him my terms," Grant said. "And then we find out whether they value what I bring to the company enough to accept boundaries, or whether they'd rather start over with someone more willing to sacrifice everything for profit margins. And if they choose the second option, then I clean out my office, cash in my stock options, and figure out what retired CEOs do with their time," Grant said with a lightness that suggested he'd already made peace with this possibility. "Maybe I'll take up painting. You could teach me." Iris laughed despite her anxiety. "You'd hate painting. You're too impatient for the kind of work that requires letting things develop slowly." "Maybe that's exactly why I should learn," Grant countered. "Might be good for me to practice something where control and efficiency don't matter as much as patience and attention." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, and then Iris spoke again, her voice small. "Thank you, Dad, for choosing this, for choosing me. I know it's costing you, and thank you." "You're not costing me anything," Grant said firmly. "The company, the board, the reputation I've built, those are just things. Impressive things, certainly, but still just things. You're my daughter. You're what matters. And if it took losing everything else to remember that, then maybe losing everything else is exactly what I needed." The board meeting 3 days later was exactly as contentious as Grant had anticipated. He presented his proposed new arrangement: reduced hours, genuine boundaries between work and personal life, delegation of responsibilities that didn't require his direct oversight, and watched the board members' expressions shift from surprise to resistance to outright hostility. "This is unacceptable," Victoria Chen said, her voice icy with disapproval. She was the board's vice chair and had never particularly liked Grant's management style. "You're essentially asking us to pay you a full CEO's salary for part-time work." "I'm proposing a restructuring that acknowledges reality," Grant countered calmly. "I've been working 80-hour weeks for 30 years, and it's neither sustainable nor necessary. Most of what I do could be delegated to competent executives who need the development opportunity. What requires my direct involvement, strategic vision, major negotiations, crisis management, amounts to maybe 30 hours a week if we're being generous. The rest is security theater, performative presence that makes the board feel like their CEO is sufficiently committed." "Security theater?" Richard Morrison, the chairman, looked affronted. "You're diminishing the importance of your role." "I'm accurately assessing it," Grant said, "and I'm proposing we structure my compensation and responsibilities accordingly. If you want me to stay, these are my terms. If you can't accept them, I'll resign effective immediately, and you can search for someone more willing to sacrifice their entire existence for marginal improvements in shareholder value." The room erupted in argument, board members talking over each other as they debated whether Grant was being reasonable or had lost his mind. Victoria pushed for an immediate vote of no confidence. Richard tried to negotiate some middle ground. Others watched the conflict with the detached interest of people waiting to see which way power would flow before committing themselves. Finally, Marcus Webb spoke up. He was the oldest board member, a semi-retired venture capitalist who'd been with the company since its early days. "I think Grant's proposal makes sense," he said calmly, and his voice cut through the chaos. "We've been burning out our CEO for decades, measuring his worth by hours worked instead of results achieved. Maybe it's time we acknowledge that model is broken." "Marcus, you can't be serious," Victoria protested. "Completely serious," Marcus said. "I've watched Grant build this company into an industry leader while sacrificing his health, his family relationships, and any semblance of personal life. We celebrated that sacrifice because it benefited us. But what does it say about us that we require that level of destruction as the price of leadership? What kind of organization have we built if we can't function without grinding our best people into dust?" The question landed heavily, forcing board members to confront the implications of what they were demanding. Grant watched faces shift as people processed Marcus's challenge. saw some genuine consideration beginning to replace reflexive resistance. "I'll put it another way," Grant said into the silence. "You can have me as CEO under these new terms, with clear boundaries and sustainable hours. Or you can search for someone new who will work themselves to death for you. But I'm done pretending that version of leadership is healthy or heroic. It's just self-destruction dressed up as dedication, and I won't model it anymore." The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Grant had expected. 7 board members supported his new arrangement, 5 opposed it, and 3 abstained. Not a ringing endorsement, but sufficient to keep him in his position with the boundaries he'd insisted on. "You realize this makes you look weak," Victoria said afterward, cornering him in the hallway. "A CEO who won't fully commit to the job, who chooses personal matters over professional obligations. That reputation will follow you." "Good," Grant said simply. "Maybe it'll inspire other leaders to make similar choices. Maybe it'll start conversations about whether our current definition of success is actually working for anyone. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help my daughter understand that she's worth more than any career achievement I could possibly earn." He left the building and drove directly to the guest house, where Iris was working on Mia's portrait. She looked up when he entered, anxiety clear in her expression. "Well?" she asked. "They voted to keep me under the new terms," Grant said. 7-5, with 3 abstentions. Not exactly a mandate, but sufficient. Iris set down her brush and crossed the room, wrapping her arms around her father. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you for standing up for what mattered." "I'm proud of me too," Grant admitted. "Terrified about what this means for my professional reputation, worried about how the company will function with my reduced involvement, anxious about whether I made the right choice, but also proud that I did it." They stood like that for a long moment, father and daughter, both of them learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Then Iris pulled back and gestured at the easel where Mia's portrait was taking shape. "Come look," she said. "Tell me what you think." The painting showed Mia in 3/4 profile, her expression caught somewhere between concentration and delight. Iris had rendered her with loose, expressive brushwork that captured energy and movement even in a static image. The background was deliberately vague, suggestions of light and color that drew the eye to the girl herself without providing distracting detail. "It's extraordinary," Grant said honestly. "You've made her look exactly how she feels. All possibility and momentum, this small person who doesn't yet know about limitations or reasons why things can't be done. It's hopeful in the best way possible." "That's what I wanted," Iris said, studying her own work critically. "To capture that sense of being at the beginning of something, when everything still feels possible and the world hasn't taught you to be afraid yet." "Is that what you're feeling?" Grant asked gently. "Like you're at the beginning of something?" Iris considered this, her gaze distant. "Maybe. It's terrifying, honestly. I've spent 5 years hidden away, and now I'm painting portraits and planning gallery shows and having conversations with people who see me without flinching. It's like learning to walk again, exciting and exhausting, and occasionally makes me want to retreat back to something safer." "But you're not retreating," Grant observed. "No," Iris agreed. "I'm not. Because I finally understand that safe isn't the same as good. Safe just means nothing hurts you, but it also means nothing helps you grow. And I'm tired of being safe. I want to be brave instead." Over the following weeks, a new rhythm established itself. Grant worked reduced hours, delegating responsibilities and discovering that the company functioned perfectly well without his constant oversight. Iris finished Mia's portrait and began planning her first gallery showing, reaching out to contacts her father provided, but making all final decisions herself. Lucas launched Reed Solutions with Grant's investment, printing business cards and buying a work van with his company name emblazoned on the side. And slowly, carefully, Iris and Lucas began exploring what existed between them beyond gratitude and recognition. They had coffee together while Mia was in school, long conversations about grief and healing and what it meant to build a life after trauma reshaped you. They weren't rushing toward anything, weren't putting labels on connection that was still forming. But they were present with each other, paying attention, allowing something to develop at its own pace without forcing it into predetermined shapes. She makes me remember that life continues, Lucas told Grant one afternoon while helping install new lighting in the converted carriage house studio. That finding Sarah and losing her wasn't the end of my story, just a chapter. An important chapter, maybe the most important one, but still just part of a longer narrative. Iris says something similar about you, Grant replied, steadying a ladder while Lucas worked. That you helped her remember she's more than her scars, more than what happened to her. That she gets to write the rest of her story however she wants. We're good for each other that way, Lucas said, both of us learning that survival isn't the same as living, that you can honor what you've lost while still choosing to move forward. The gallery showing happened on a crisp Saturday in November, 6 weeks after the night Lucas asked Iris to dance. The space was small but respectable, a cooperative gallery that featured emerging local artists. Iris had selected 20 paintings from her body of work, enough to represent her range and development without overwhelming the space. She was terrified. Grant could see it in how she moved through the gallery before opening, adjusting frames that didn't need adjusting, checking price tags that were already perfectly positioned. This was exposure of the most vulnerable kind, putting her art and therefore her heart on public display for judgment and potential rejection. What if no one comes, she asked Grant as they did a final check 30 minutes before opening. What if people show up but hate everything? What if they think I'm just some rich girl playing at being an artist? Then we'll know, Grant said calmly. We'll have our answer and can decide what to do with that information. But Iris, none of those outcomes would mean your art isn't valuable. They just mean this particular audience wasn't ready for it. Lucas arrived with Mia just before the official opening, and Mia immediately ran to find the portrait Iris had painted of her. It was hung at child height, deliberately positioned so Mia could see herself without adult assistance. "That's me!" Mia exclaimed, delighted by the rendering. "I look so happy, like I'm about to do something really fun." "That's because you were about to do something really fun," Iris said, kneeling beside her. "You were building the tallest block tower in history, remember?" "I remember," Mia said seriously. Then she surprised everyone by hugging Iris tightly. "Thank you for making me look so happy. That's how I feel inside, and now everyone can see it." Iris returned the hug, blinking back tears. If nothing else good came from this exhibition, she had this: a 7-year-old girl seeing herself clearly and liking what she saw. That was worth every anxious moment. The gallery filled slowly as opening time arrived. Gallery members and art enthusiasts, some of Grant's business associates who'd come out of curiosity or obligation, strangers who'd seen the announcement and wanted to support a new artist. Iris stood near the back, watching people move through the space, seeing which pieces drew attention and which were passed over quickly. Then Margaret arrived with several other members of Grant's household staff, all of them dressed in their weekend clothes rather than work uniforms. They moved through the exhibition with genuine interest, commenting on paintings they recognized from having glimpsed them over the years. "Miss Iris?" Margaret said, approaching with tears in her eyes. "These are beautiful. We had no idea you were creating such meaningful work. I particularly love this one." She gestured at a painting of the estate's gardens at twilight. "You've captured exactly how it feels to walk through there at the end of a long day. Peaceful, but also a little melancholy, like something's ending and something else is beginning." More people arrived, and the gallery took on the energy of a successful opening, conversations flowing, people genuinely engaging with the work, several pieces already sporting red sold dots. Iris found herself in demand, answering questions about her process and inspiration, accepting compliments with growing confidence. A woman in her 50s stood for a long time in front of the lighthouse painting, the one Mia had said looked brave. When she finally turned away, her eyes were wet. "I lost my daughter 3 years ago," she said quietly to Iris. "Cancer. She was only 22. And this painting, it's exactly how I've been trying to feel. Still shining even when the storm is overwhelming. Still here even when everything hurts. I'd like to buy it, if it's available." Iris felt something crack open in her chest, a recognition that her art was doing exactly what Lucas had suggested it could, building bridges between her experience and others, creating connection through honest expression of difficult emotions. "It's yours," she said, "and I'm so sorry about your daughter. I hope the painting brings you comfort." By the end of the evening, 12 of the 20 paintings had sold, and several people had requested information about commissioning custom work. Gallery members were already talking about featuring Iris in a larger show the following year. Grant stood with Lucas near the back of the space, watching Iris accept congratulations and answer questions with the kind of confidence that came from finally believing she had something worth sharing. "Thank you," Grant said quietly, "for that night at the gala, for asking her to dance and reminding her she was worth seeing. None of this would have happened without that first moment of courage." "You're welcome," Lucas said, "but honestly, I think all of this would have happened eventually. Maybe not in this exact way, but Iris was always going to find her way back to the world. She just needed someone to remind her it was safe to try." "Still," Grant insisted, "thank you for everything you've given both of us, the reminder about what matters, the example of how to be brave about kindness, the chance to honor my brother's message finally. You changed our lives." "You changed your own lives," Lucas corrected gently. "I just happened to be there at the right moment. But I'm glad I was. Glad I got to witness what happened when you both chose to stop hiding and start living." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Iris found herself standing with Lucas near the portrait of Mia. The little girl had fallen asleep on a bench near the front of the gallery, exhausted by excitement and well past her bedtime. "I've been thinking," Lucas said, his voice low and careful, "about what happens next. For us, I mean. We've been having coffee and conversations, and Mia thinks you're magic, and I find myself looking for excuses to see you even when there's no particular reason." "I do the same thing," Iris admitted, her heart beating faster. "Look for excuses, I mean. Suggest painting sessions when I don't really need reference photos, text you about things that could wait until we see each other anyway." "So maybe," Lucas continued, "we stop pretending we need excuses. Maybe we acknowledge that something's developing here and see where it goes. No pressure, no expectations beyond being honest with each other and taking it slow. Just giving this a chance to become whatever it's meant to be." Iris looked at him, really looked, the way he'd looked at her that first night in the ballroom. She saw his scars and his grief, his competence and his gentleness, his capacity for courage and his willingness to be vulnerable. She saw a man who'd loved and lost and learned how to love again without betraying what came before, and she saw possibility. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." Well, Lucas smiled, and in that smile was relief and hope, and the particular joy that comes from taking a risk and discovering it might pay off in ways you couldn't predict. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." Grant watched this exchange from across the gallery and felt his brother's coin warm in his pocket, as if David himself was offering approval. The evening had brought together all the threads that had been weaving themselves since that night at the Rosewood Grand. His reconnection with Iris, Lucas building his business and his future, Iris finding her artistic voice, new relationships forming from old wounds. Margaret appeared at his elbow, having finished helping the gallery staff with cleanup. "Beautiful evening, Mr. Halston. Miss Iris should be very proud." "She should," Grant agreed, "and I'm proud of her. Proud of the courage it took to put herself out there like this." "If I may say so, sir," Margaret said carefully, "you've been quite courageous yourself lately. The staff has noticed the changes. You're home more, you're more present. You seem happier despite all the professional complications." "I am happier," Grant said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "Happier than I've been since my wife died. Maybe happier than I've been ever, because this happiness is built on something solid instead of just the absence of pain." "That's lovely to hear," Margaret said warmly. "And it's lovely to see the house feel like a home again instead of just a place where you sleep between business obligations." She excused herself, leaving Grant alone with his thoughts and observations. Lucas was carefully lifting the sleeping Mia, preparing to carry her to the car. Iris was thanking the gallery owners and arranging details about payment and shipping for the sold pieces. Normal life happening in normal ways, but somehow transformed by the recognition that these moments mattered more than any board meeting or business deal ever could. They all left together, Lucas and Mia heading to their apartment, Grant and Iris returning to the estate in comfortable silence. It had been a perfect evening, not because everything went flawlessly, but because it was honest and vulnerable and real. Because Iris had taken the risk of being seen and discovered that being seen was survivable. More than survivable. It was transformative. "Thank you for tonight," Iris said as they pulled through the estate gates. "For being there, for supporting this, for not trying to control the outcome or manage my expectations, just for being my dad and letting that be enough." "Being your dad is more than enough," Grant said. "It's everything, actually, everything that matters." They walked from the car to the guest house together, the November air crisp but not yet cold enough to be uncomfortable. Inside, Iris's studio glowed with the work she'd created over the past weeks. New pieces already underway, commissions to complete, her artistic voice growing stronger with each canvas. "What are you painting next?" Grant asked, pausing to examine a sketch pinned to the wall. "I don't know yet," Iris admitted. But for the first time, that uncertainty feels exciting instead of terrifying. Like I get to discover what wants to be created instead of forcing it to fit predetermined expectations. "That's good," Grant said. "That's growth." He left her there and walked back to the main house through darkness punctuated by lights from the guest house windows. Inside his bedroom, he stood at the window looking out at his daughter's space, seeing the glow that suggested she was still working, still creating, still engaged with life in ways that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Grant pulled David's coin from his pocket and held it up to the light, reading the inscription one more time. "Courage is choosing kindness when fear says run." That's what they'd all done, he realized. Lucas asking Iris to dance despite every social convention saying he shouldn't. Iris accepting despite 5 years of fear telling her to refuse. Grant walking away from his own gala to have pancakes with his daughter instead of maintaining professional obligations. Lucas considering Grant's investment despite the risk of being patronized or controlled. Iris showing her work despite the possibility of rejection. Courage choosing kindness over and over in small decisions that accumulated into transformed lives. Grant set the coin on his nightstand where he could see it every morning and climbed into bed, exhausted but satisfied. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more board tensions, more navigation of his reduced work schedule, more learning how to be present instead of perpetually pursuing the next achievement. But tonight, he'd witnessed his daughter triumph, seen Lucas building a business that mattered, watched new relationships forming from shared vulnerability. Tonight was proof that change was possible, that choosing differently than you'd always chosen could lead somewhere beautiful and unexpected. And that proof was worth more than every success he'd achieved in 30 years of relentless ambition. In her studio, Iris cleaned her brushes and prepared for the next day's work. She pulled out her phone and sent Lucas a text. "Thank you for tonight, for being there, for believing in my work, for the conversation about what comes next. I meant what I said. I want to see where this goes." His response came quickly. "Me too. Sleep well, Iris. You earned it tonight." She smiled and set down the phone, feeling something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope that tomorrow might be better than today, that the future held possibility instead of just more careful survival. It was a small feeling, fragile and new, but it was real. And real was enough. The night settled over the estate, quiet and peaceful. In the main house, Grant slept without nightmares for the first time in years. In the guest house, Iris dreamed of paintings yet to be created and connections yet to be explored. And across the city, Lucas tucked Mia into bed and told her about the beautiful evening where a brave princess showed her art to the world and people saw how remarkable she truly was. 3 families connected by one dance, one moment of courage, one choice to see what everyone else overlooked. And in that seeing, in that choosing, in that brave act of kindness when fear said run, they'd all found something they'd been searching for without knowing they were searching. They'd found each other. They'd found themselves. They'd found proof that it was never too late to choose differently. To be brave, to let love and connection matter more than safety or success or any of the other things the world insisted should take priority. And that finding, more than any achievement or accomplishment, was the true measure of a life well lived. The end.